Hey there, tonight we're diving into the grimy world of World War II hygiene, a reality where soldiers often faced more danger from lice than enemy fire. What you're about to discover might just have you reaching for the nearest bar of soap. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now get comfortable, perhaps dim the lights, or find that perfect pillow position, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The gritty reality of World War II, where soldiers faced not just enemy fire, but the relentless onslaught of microscopic foes with an appetite for human misery. If there's one thing to learn from history, it's that lice and fleas have no concept of patriotism. These were the true mercenaries of the Second World War, hitching rides on the backs of soldiers and setting up camp right next to the front lines of human flesh. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty, quite literally. Imagine thousands of soldiers crammed into trenches, foxholes and barracks with little more than a hope and a prayer when it came to personal hygiene. Bathing facilities. Those were as rare as a sunny day in the English countryside. In fact, it wasn't uncommon for soldiers to go weeks without a proper wash, and that's being generous. The smell was reportedly so potent that it could knock a buzzard off a manure wagon. Lice, the unwelcome guests of any war, didn't discriminate. They thrived in the cramped, damp conditions soldiers endured, feeding on the blood of anyone unfortunate enough to cross their path. With no effective pesticides or treatments readily available, these tiny vampires had free rein. The U.S. Army even produced a manual suggesting soldiers dust themselves with insecticide powder, but given the rudimentary technology of the time, success was hit or miss. And boy, when it missed, it was like hosting a family reunion for lice. Fleas were equally ambitious, jumping at the chance to add to the chaos. Unlike lice, fleas could leap from host to host with the kind of acrobatic skill that would make any gymnast envious. Soldiers had to get creative, using concoctions of kerosene and Vaseline to try and rid themselves of these pests. As you can guess, rubbing flammable liquids on your skin isn't exactly dermatologically recommended, but desperate times, desperate measures, right? The impact on morale was palpable. Just imagine trying to strategize a battle plan while your body feels like it's hosting a circus of insects. And it's not just about discomfort. These infestations had genuine psychological effects. Soldiers were distracted, irritable, and frankly, tired of scratching themselves to oblivion. On the front lines, where every moment could be your last, the last thing you needed was a constant buzzing reminder that war can be fought on many fronts, including the one right on your scalp. But the torture didn't stop with insects. Enter trench foot, the unpleasant condition that could make a seasoned soldier shiver. Born from the combination of wet conditions and unsanitary practices, trench foot was a literal war of attrition against soldiers' feet. The condition caused swelling, pain, and eventually gangrene if left untreated. It may not have had the immediate fatality of a bullet, but it could render a soldier useless, essentially sidelining him from the action. And let's face it, in the brutal arithmetic of war, every man down was a significant loss. In World War I, trench foot had already claimed tens of thousands of soldiers, and though lessons were learned, World War II was not without its share of cases. The solution was deceptively simple: dry socks and proper foot hygiene. However, with the prevailing conditions, executing such a simple task was easier said than done. Soldiers were advised to change socks regularly, a luxury afforded more in theory than practice. When you're knee-deep in mud and dodging bullets, a fresh pair of socks isn't exactly a top priority. These hygiene issues may seem trivial compared to the grand narrative of World War II, but they were the harsh realities of daily life for soldiers. Glamorized Hollywood versions of the war rarely highlight these aspects. We love the stories of heroism and valor, the sweeping battles and strategic genius. But it's the nitty-gritty details, the lice between the lines, that paint a fuller picture. War is a multifaceted beast, and sometimes it's the tiny, crawling parts that remind us of the true cost of conflict. The war against lice and trench foot, though not as renowned as the Battle of the Bulge or D-Day, was a daily, personal fight for every soldier. It was a testament to human resilience, and perhaps a reminder of our own fragility. Because at the end of the day, it wasn't just about defeating the enemy across the battlefield. It was also about surviving the battle within one's own beleaguered body. While the battle against lice and trench foot raged on in the trenches, another battlefield quietly simmered in the military camps and field hospitals. And believe me, it wasn't any prettier. Here's a setting where the phrase, "cleanliness is next to godliness," might as well have been a cruel joke. You see, maintaining hygiene amidst the chaos of war wasn't just a challenge. It was akin to Sisyphus pushing that boulder up the hill, only to have it roll back down with a splash of mud and a whiff of latrine. Ah yes, the latrines. In the world of makeshift sanitation, these were the unsung heroes of the battlefield, constructed from whatever materials were at hand, wood, metal, or if you were lucky, an actual toilet seat. They were meant to serve the basic human need with a touch of dignity. Spoiler alert, dignity was often in short supply. The truth is, these facilities were barely a step up from the primordial hole in the ground, and in the spirit of military efficiency, they were often strategically placed near mess areas, because what better way to enhance your dining experience than with the gentle aroma of a pit latrine wafting through the air? Disease was the inevitable consequence of such conditions, and dysentery was the headliner of this grim show. Picture this, a disease that makes you sweat more than a drill sergeant breathing down your neck. Dysentery didn't care about rank or valor. It struck with the fury of 1,000 unwashed socks, leaving soldiers debilitated and at times dead. During the North African campaign alone, dysentery affected around 50% of the troops at its peak. These weren't just statistics. They were debilitating realities that drained fighting strength faster than a leaky fuel tank. But if you think the camps were bad, let's take a detour to the field hospitals. Forget the pristine white wards depicted in your favorite war movie. The real deal was a whirlwind of chaos, blood, and unsanitary conditions. Medics, often portrayed as the angelic saviors of the battlefield, were more like gladiators, fighting not just against enemy fire, but also against infection and disease. Infections spread faster than gossip in a small town, and without effective antibiotics. Remember, penicillin was still in its infancy. Every wound was a potential death sentence. The romanticized image of medics as serene Florence Nightingales doesn't quite hold up under scrutiny. Sure, they were heroes, but their halo was a bit tarnished by the realities of war. These folks were overworked, undersupplied, and quite literally in the trenches with their patients. Picture performing surgery under a tent with mud-soaked boots, using whatever instruments hadn't been misplaced or commandeered for other uses. And let's not forget the battle against time. Transporting the injured from the battlefield to these makeshift hospitals was a race against death itself, often taking hours across treacherous terrain. Economic context also played a part. Wartime budgets were tighter than a sailor's knot, and priorities leaned more toward bullets than bedpans. The cost of war was measured in lives, but also in dollars, and hygiene wasn't exactly seen as a top-line item. This wasn't just a military oversight. It reflected the broader societal values of the time. In an era where victory was paramount, the comfort and cleanliness of soldiers took a backseat to the grander goals of strategy and conquest. The harsh reality of waste disposal in these camps and hospitals could make even the hardiest soul flinch. Without modern plumbing, waste had to be physically removed and buried. Now, imagine doing that while dodging artillery shells and trying to keep your lunch down. It was a thankless, dirty job, but someone had to do it. And in the grand scheme of war, it was yet another testament to the sheer grit and determination of those who served. So, when we peel back the layers of glory and valor, we find a world that's far from the romantic tales we've been told. It's a story of survival, not just against enemy forces, but against the daily grind of dirt, disease, and despair. These soldiers and medics were not just fighting for freedom. They were battling the very conditions that sought to break them down from within. And in that battle, they found a resilience that went beyond the call of duty, a testament to the human spirit in the face of unimaginable adversity. As we continue to unravel the complexities of World War II, remember that history isn't just about heroes and villains. It's about the unsung, the overlooked, and the downright dirty parts that make the story complete. Keep your boots on, because there's more muck to wade through in the coming chapters. Shift gears from the mud-splattered trenches to the home front, where the battle lines were drawn not with rifles, but with ration books and soap scraps. While soldiers slogged through the muck and mire, civilians faced a different kind of warfare, one against scarcity and the ever-present spectre of grime. It's a tale of ingenuity, desperation, and let's be honest, a touch of the absurd. Picture this. The year is 1942, and the world's in full war mode. Rationing isn't just a suggestion, it's a way of life. The British Ministry of Food, with more power than a school principal on exam day, had decreed that soap was a luxury, not a necessity. Suddenly, a bar of soap was more coveted than a pair of nylons or a black market chocolate bar. Households were issued a meager allowance of soap, totaling about 3 ounces per person per month. To put that in perspective, that's less than the weight of a modern smartphone. Imagine cleaning your entire house, your clothes, and yourself with the equivalent of a travel-sized shampoo bottle. Talk about a sud struggle. Families got creative, stretching their soap supply like a master chef stretches a pot of soup. Soap slivers were carefully saved and molded into new bars, forming a Frankenstein's monster of soap, part lavender, part mysterious. It was a grubby jigsaw puzzle that smelled like a thrift store's basement. And when the soap ran out, folks turned to alternatives like soapwort and rhubarb leaves, which sound more like ingredients for a witch's brew than a hygiene routine. But soap wasn't the only casualty of wartime economics. Cleaning products were watered down to the point where they were mostly, well, water. Housewives, the unsung Mac jivers of the home front, took to diluting whatever remained, eking out a few more scrubs from a bottle that once promised to tackle stains with the fury of 1,000 janitors. The result, a nation of homes that were cleanish, a bit like trying to tidy up using a slightly damp paper towel. As if rationing wasn't enough, government propaganda campaigns kicked into high gear, urging citizens to maintain hygiene despite the shortages. The British government, for instance, launched the Make Do and Mend campaign, essentially a national pep talk to keep spirits up and bacteria down. Posters with messages like, soap is scarce, but cleanliness must not be. Adorned walls, a gentle reminder that your patriotic duty extended to your bathtub. Meanwhile, across the pond in the United States, life wasn't exactly a bubble bath either. American families faced their own set of challenges with rationing. Sugar, meat, and butter were restricted, leading to some culinary contortions that would make Julia Child weep. But it wasn't just about food. Everything from gas to rubber was in short supply, as resources were funneled to the war effort like water down a faulty drain. Housewives, those paragons of perseverance, turned to homemade cleaning solutions like vinegar and baking soda, which, let's face it, are still staples in any environmentally conscious household today. But back then, it was more about necessity than choice. The wartime mantra was all about victory begins at home, a slogan that sounds like it belongs on a motivational poster in a corporate boardroom. Yet it captured the spirit of the era, a collective effort where every scrubbed floor and spotless dish was a small victory against the Axis powers. Let's not forget the kids. With soap in short supply, children were sometimes sent to school with a lingering ode to outdoors. Teachers became frontline soldiers in the battle against dirt, often resorting to sending notes home as gentle reminders that despite the shortages, a little soap could go a long way. It's a miracle that cleanliness is next to godliness didn't make the curriculum alongside reading and arithmetic. But here's the real kicker. Amid this grime and grit, people managed to find humor and resilience. The British, known for their stiff upper lip, took it all in stride. After all, if you can keep calm and carry on while bombs are falling, a little dirt under the fingernails is a minor inconvenience. And in America, the communal effort to support the war effort fostered a sense of unity that transcended the dreariness of diluted cleaning fluids. As we dig deeper into this soapless saga, it's clear that wartime hygiene was more than a matter of cleanliness. It was a test of ingenuity and resilience. Civilians of World War II faced challenges that would make today's life hacks look like child's play. They were the ultimate recyclers, the original dye-ers, turning scarcity into an art form. With war barns and victory gardens, the home front was a battlefield of its own, where every scrub, every makeshift bar of soap, was a small stand against chaos. Yet, as we'll see in the next chapter, the story of wartime hygiene doesn't end with soap and vinegar. There's more to uncover, more myths to debunk, and more truths to reveal as we continue our journey through the gritty realities of a world at war. So hang tight, because the dirtier the story, the clearer the picture becomes. So, just when you think you've scrubbed away the last of the wartime grime, along comes propaganda to muddy the waters. Yes, folks, welcome to the spin zone of World War II, where both the Allies and Axis powers painted their soldiers as paragons of cleanliness, shining beacons of moral superiority, gleaming through the fog of war. But let's be real here. The notion of an ever-pristine soldier is about as credible as a politician's promise come election season. Propaganda was the soapbox of the age, and both sides wielded it like a well-oiled machine. They cranked out posters, films, and radio broadcasts depicting soldiers as clean, disciplined, and righteous. These depictions were as polished as a new recruit's boots on parade day, but they conveniently glossed over the less savory realities of military life, like the aforementioned lice, trench foot, and the whole not showering for weeks ordeal. On the Allied side, the clean soldier became a symbol of the moral high ground. American GIs were often portrayed as fresh-faced heroes, ready to liberate Europe one soap-scrubbed armpit at a time. Take, for instance, the classic wartime posters featuring the quintessential G.I. Joe, uniform pressed, chin up, a smile that gleamed like he just came from a toothpaste commercial. What these posters didn't show was G.I. Joe using his helmet as a makeshift wash basin when lucky enough to find water. The British, not to be outdone, doubled down on the cleanliness crusade. Keep clean and keep fighting, proclaimed the Ministry of Information, as if dirt and grime were the real enemy. They pushed the narrative that personal hygiene was a patriotic duty, one that could even influence the course of the war. But when soap rations were skinnier than a supermodel's lunch, the average Tommy was more likely to be battling body odor than the Axis powers. Speaking of Axis powers, let's not forget our friends across the lines. Nazi Germany was no slouch in the propaganda department either, portrayed their soldiers as Aryan paragons of purity and discipline, images that were as meticulously curated as a dictator's mustache. The German Wehrmacht was depicted as a well-oiled machine, not unlike their propaganda efforts, which churned out idealized images of soldiers who looked like they'd just stepped out of a grooming salon. But here's the kicker. These images were often as far removed from reality as you can get without needing a passport. German soldiers, like their Allied counterparts, grappled with their own hygiene hardships. The Eastern Front, in particular, was a nightmare of mud and misery, where soldiers often went weeks without changing clothes or bathing. Lice and disease didn't respect borders or ideologies. They were equal opportunity pests, happy to feast on any soldier, regardless of uniform. In the Soviet Union, meanwhile, propaganda depicted the Red Army as a force of unstoppable, clean-cut heroes. Yet, the realities of the Eastern Front were harsh and unforgiving. Soviet soldiers were as likely to be battling frostbite and dysentery as they were the Wehrmacht. And in conditions where even basic necessities were scarce, maintaining the spotless image of the Soviet super-soldier was more fantasy than fact. Even Japan, with its Bushido code, valorizing cleanliness and discipline, couldn't escape the gritty truths of war. Japanese soldiers in the Pacific Theater faced rampant disease and debilitating conditions, often exacerbated by a lack of supplies and medical care. Yet, propaganda films and posters back home depicted them as unyielding warriors, disciplined and immaculate, a stark contrast to the reality of jungle warfare. So why did these myths of the clean soldier persist? Well, the answer lies in the power of perception. During wartime, maintaining morale was as critical as maintaining supply lines. The clean, heroic soldier became a symbol of hope and resilience, a way to rally public support and reinforce the notion that their side was in the right. It was easier to believe in a just and righteous cause when your soldiers looked like they just stepped out of a barber shop rather than a trench. But let's not kid ourselves. This was all smoke and mirrors, a sanitized version of war for public consumption. The truth was far more complex and unvarnished. Soldiers on all sides dealt with the same filth, disease, and discomfort, a reminder that war is an equalizer in the most unsavory of ways. The clean soldier was a myth, a comforting story we told ourselves to make sense of the chaos. And yet, even as we debunk these myths, we can't entirely dismiss their appeal. There's something inherently romantic about the idea of a soldier standing tall and clean amidst the chaos, a beacon of humanity in the face of inhumanity. This image, however polished and fictional, provided comfort and motivation to those on the home front, a reminder that order could emerge from chaos, that good could triumph over evil. As we continue sifting through the mud and myths of World War II, it's crucial to recognize both the legends and the gritty realities they obscure. The clean soldier, like many wartime myths, was a product of its time, a reflection of our collective desire to find meaning and heroism in the midst of conflict. But as we peel back the layers, we discover a story that's richer, more complex, and ultimately more human than any propaganda poster could convey. So, with myths debunked and realities laid bare, we find ourselves at a crossroads. The story of wartime hygiene continues to unfold, revealing not just the hardships and ingenuity of those who lived through it, but also the enduring power of narrative in shaping our understanding of history. As we forge ahead into the next chapter, let's keep our minds open and our eyes sharp, for there's still much to uncover in this tale of dirt, disease, and determination. Stay tuned, because the journey is far from over. As we forge ahead into the next chapter, let's keep our minds open and our eyes sharp, because the story of wartime hygiene doesn't just fade away with the last rifle shot. Nope, the legacy of those muddy trenches and make-do soap bars lives on, echoing through modern military sanitation practices and public health policies like a particularly stubborn earworm. First, let's talk numbers. World War II, with all its chaos and grime, was a wake-up call that military hygiene was about as crucial as having the right ammo. The war taught armies that you can't win battles with a bunch of soldiers sidelined by dysentery or trench foot. So, post-war, the military brass took a long, hard look at their sanitation playbook. They introduced more advanced practices, like better waste disposal systems and mandatory hygiene protocols. And you can bet your boots they didn't just stop at soap. By the time the Korean War rolled around, American soldiers had access to mobile shower units, a luxury that would have seemed like magic to a WWII. These changes weren't just about keeping uniforms spick and span. They were about keeping soldiers combat-ready and morale high. After all, it's hard to fight for freedom when you're itching like a flea circus. The US military poured resources into researching and developing products that would make lice and fleas about as welcome as a skunk at a picnic. By 1950, the military was rolling out DDT-powered delousing stations, a chemical cocktail that might have sent lice packing faster than a retreating army. And here's the kicker. This focus on military hygiene had ripple effects in civilian life, too. See, the war had a habit of pushing technological and social boundaries, and hygiene was no exception. Public health policies took a cue from the military's newfound love for cleanliness. The post-war era saw an increased emphasis on sanitation in public spaces. Schools, hospitals, and even the humble public restroom got a hygienic makeover. Suddenly, cleanliness wasn't just next to godliness. It was a matter of national pride. Now, let's zoom out and talk about the mighty dollar. Wartime hygiene efforts weren't just about keeping soldiers healthy. They were also a savvy economic move. Sick soldiers are expensive. They need medical care. They can't fight, and they drain resources like a sieve. So, investing in hygiene was a bit like buying insurance. It cost money up front, sure, but it saved a fortune in the long run by keeping fighting forces battle-ready and reducing the need for costly medical interventions. But as with all things, there's a balance to be struck. The post-war world had to navigate the fine line between cleanliness and overzealous germophobia. While the military was busy eradicating lice, the civilian world was navigating the dawn of modern consumerism. The 50s brought the rise of convenience culture, and with it, an obsession with cleanliness. Advertisers peddled everything from vacuum cleaners to dishwashers, tapping into the newly minted idea that a clean home was a happy home. And while this was great for hygiene, it also set the stage for a culture of consumption that prized tidiness above all else. Yet, for all the advances and societal shifts, the myths of wartime hygiene persisted. The image of the clean, righteous soldier endured, a romanticized holdover from a time when propaganda was king. Even today, war movies and novels often gloss over the gritty realities, opting for a sanitized vision of the past. It's a testament to the power of narrative, the way it shapes our memories and perceptions, even when the truth is messier than a toddler's art project. So, What can modern society learn from this soapy saga? First, that necessity is the mother of all innovation. When push comes to shove, humans have an uncanny knack for turning scarcity into opportunity, whether it's inventing mobile showers for soldiers or stretching soap slivers into new bars. Second, that cleanliness, while important, shouldn't overshadow the bigger picture. Hygiene isn't just about killing germs. It's about promoting health and well-being in a sustainable, balanced way. And lastly, that the stories we tell matter. Myths, like the clean soldier, endure because they offer comfort, a sense of order amid chaos. But it's crucial to remember that these stories are often partial truths, polished for public consumption. The real stories, the ones with all their dirt and complexity, are where the real lessons lie. And those lessons, they're as relevant today as they were in the trenches of World War II. So, dear listener, as you drift off with these historical tidbits swirling in your mind, remember that history isn't just a collection of dates and battles. It's a tapestry of human experiences, woven from the threads of reality and myth. And in the end, it's the interplay between the two that gives us a clearer picture of where we've been and where we're headed. Sleep well, armed with the knowledge that every scrubbed floor and laundered uniform is part of a legacy that stretches far beyond the battlefield. In the 14th century, Italy wasn't exactly the boot-shaped paradise of sunlit vineyards and pasta dreams we like to imagine. Instead, picture a patchwork quilt of squabbling city-states, each with its own political drama and a penchant for backstabbing that would make Shakespeare blush. These cities, Florence, Venice, Milan, and their ilk, were like a bunch of Renaissance Kardashians vying for the title of most fabulous. But before we dive into their glamorous exploits, let's talk about the not-so-sexy catalyst that kick-started it all, the Black Death, or as I like to call it, the medieval party crasher. The Black Death was the kind of plague that makes you grateful for modern medicine. Between 1347 and 1351, it wiped out about 30-60% of Europe's population. That's right, if you had 10 friends, you were suddenly down to 4 or 7. The chaos this caused can't be overstated. Cities were left with empty homes, businesses without owners, and an economy that seemed to be doing the limbo. How low could it go? Wages rose due to labor shortages, and serfs found themselves with unprecedented bargaining power. You could say the plague was an unintentional social equalizer, albeit one with terrible side effects. Amid this grim backdrop, the seeds of the Renaissance were sown. As the dust settled, people started thinking, hey, maybe we should try living a little. This wasn't just about survival, they wanted to thrive. Enter the Medici family, Florence's very own answer to a Renaissance version of Apple Inc. Cosimo de' Medici, the family patriarch, had a revelation. Art could be more than just pretty pictures. It could be a marketing tool, a way to cement power and influence. The Medicis turned patronage into a strategic game, backing artists like Donatello and Brunelleschi to create works that screamed, we're rich, we're powerful, and we're cultured. Florence wasn't alone in this cultural arms race. Venice, known for its canals and love of ornate masquerade balls, wasn't about to let Florence hog the spotlight. The city invested heavily in its own artists and architects, turning its skyline into a canvas of Renaissance ideals. This competition between city-states was like a historical version of Project Runway, with each locale trying to outdo the others in terms of artistic flair and architectural marvels. But while the artistic Renaissance was dazzling, the political landscape was anything but stable. Italy's city-states were constantly at each other's throats, their rivalries fueled by commerce and territorial ambitions. The Papal States, the Kingdom of Naples, and other regions were all players in a high-stakes game of chess, where alliances shifted as quickly as a teen's tick-tock interests. Yet this chaos fostered a unique environment where new ideas could flourish. The constant power struggles meant that leaders were always on the lookout for ways to outsmart their rivals, often turning to art and culture to gain an edge. This whirlwind of economic turmoil and political intrigue was the perfect breeding ground for the Renaissance. It was a time when people began to question the status quo, leading to breakthroughs in art, science, and philosophy. While the romanticized image of the Renaissance is full of flowing gowns and grand palaces, the reality was more gritty, a testament to human resilience in the face of adversity. And let's not forget those myths that have wrapped themselves around the Renaissance like vines. on a villa. The idea that it was all about enlightenment and progress glosses over the fact that it was also a period rife with inequality and power struggles. Sure, the Medicis funded art, but they also ran Florence like a mafia family with better PR. And those city-states, they were as cutthroat as any modern corporation, using patronage to manipulate both artists and the public. In this clash of ideals and realities, the Renaissance emerged as a beacon of what humanity could achieve, given a bit of breathing room and a lot of competitive spirit. It was an era of contradictions, a time when art flourished amidst the rubble of past devastation, and when cities sparkled with new ideas even as they plotted against their neighbors. As we continue through this exploration, remember that the Renaissance was less a golden age and more a kaleidoscope of human ambition, folly, and brilliance. And while it's easy to get swept up in the romance of it all, don't forget to peek behind the curtain, because sometimes that's where the most interesting stories are hiding. Speaking of hidden stories, let's dive into the lives of Renaissance rock stars, those larger-than-life figures whose names we casually drop at cocktail parties, even if we can't quite remember which painting they did. Enter Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, the Renaissance's version of Taylor Swift and Kanye West, but with more marble and fewer Instagram followers. Starting with Leonardo da Vinci, the man who could probably fill a modern-day LinkedIn profile with more hyphens than anyone else. He was an inventor, painter, sculptor, scientist, and even a part-time military strategist. This guy wasn't just a jack of all trades. He was the master of them too. Born in 1452 in Vinci, a town that probably wouldn't be on the map if not for him, Leonardo was the illegitimate son of a notary and a peasant woman. This meant he wasn't bogged down by the usual expectations of noble kids. He was free to let his curiosity run wild. By the time Leonardo hit his 20s, he was already turning heads in Florence, which at the time was like the Silicon Valley for artists. But instead of tech startups, it was all about frescoes and sculptures. Leonardo's patrons were the Medicis, who had a knack for spotting talent. Think of them as the Simon Cowells of their day. They bankrolled his early work, setting the stage for Leonardo to eventually paint The Last Supper, a piece that took around 3 years to complete and is now considered a masterpiece despite its ongoing battle with peeling paint. But let's not romanticize too much. Leonardo wasn't some starving artist fueled by pure passion. He was a savvy businessman who knew how to play the game. While his notebooks brimmed with sketches of flying machines and anatomical drawings, the man needed to eat, and likely a little more than just bread and water. His commissions, like The Last Supper, were less about expressing his innermost feelings and more about securing a steady paycheck. The church, his biggest client, had deep pockets and a penchant for grandiose art to remind the masses who was in charge. Moving on to Michelangelo, born in 1475, whose life story reads like a gritty underdog narrative with a chisel. This guy had a work ethic that would put today's hustle culture to shame. While Leonardo was busy being a Renaissance polymath, Michelangelo was in the trenches, quite literally, with marble dust in his lungs. He was the kind of artist who'd rather be sculpting than small-talking at a soiree. Michelangelo's David is perhaps his most famous work, a 17-foot-tall testament to human form and a nightmare for anyone with a fear of heights or large, naked statues. Finished in 1504, David was a political symbol as much as an artistic one. It embodied the defiance of Florence against larger, more powerful city-states, an ironic twist since it was the wealthy patrons who commissioned it as a display of their own clout. But Michelangelo's relationship with his patrons was rocky at best. The Medicis, the same family who backed Leonardo, also funded Michelangelo's early works. Yet, unlike Leonardo, Michelangelo's dealings with them were strained. His stubbornness and artistic integrity often clashed with the Medicis' desire for control, turning what should have been a mutually beneficial relationship into a dramatic tug-of-war. Now, let's talk economics because, as much as we love to gush over the art, it's the cold, hard cash that made it possible. The Medicis weren't throwing money at artists out of the kindness of their hearts. Patronage was a way to wield power and influence without swinging a sword. In the cutthroat world of Italian politics, art was a currency, a way to buy prestige. When Lorenzo de' Medici, aka Lorenzo the Magnificent, took charge, he understood that a painting or sculpture could be as effective as a political alliance. this wasn't just limited to the Medicis. Across Italy, families were commissioning works to outdo one another, turning their homes into mini-museums. It was an arms race of opulence, where the pen, or rather the paintbrush, was mightier than the sword. Yet, beneath this glittering facade was an economic reality that was anything but glamorous. Artists were often at the mercy of their patrons, with little room for negotiation. The power dynamics were clear. The one with the gold makes the rules. The irony is that while we now admire these masterpieces in hushed reverence, they were, in many cases, the result of financial transactions rather than artistic inspiration. The Sistine Chapel's ceiling, for instance, wasn't Michelangelo's personal dream project. It was a commission from Pope Julius Roman II, a man known more for his military campaigns than his aesthetic sensibilities. Michelangelo spent 4 years working on it, often under grueling conditions that would make a modern labor union weep. But let's not get too bogged down in the economics of it all. At the end of the day, the Renaissance was a period where human potential seemed limitless, even if the motivations were often less than pure. Behind every great work of art was a mix of ambition, politics, and yes, a decent payday. Leonardo and Michelangelo, for all their genius, were also products of their time, navigating a world where art was as much about power as it was about beauty. As we continue to unravel the tapestry of the Renaissance, keep in mind that these artists were not solitary geniuses working in isolation. They were part of a larger system where patronage, politics, and the pursuit of prestige drove innovation and creativity. While it's easy to get swept away by the romance of it all, remember that the reality was often messier, full of contradictions and compromises. And isn't that just the way history always seems to go? Speaking of history being a delightful mess, let's pivot from paintbrushes and patronage to the architectural wonders that define the Renaissance skyline. Picture this: buildings that were the Instagram influencers of their day, with arches and domes that made people whip out their sketchpads. Yeah, before selfies, it was all about doodling the Duomo. Let's begin with a name that echoes through the halls of architectural history like a rock star: Filippo Brunelleschi. The man was an architectural genius with a flair for making the impossible possible, and his piece de resistance, the dome of the Florence Cathedral, Acca Santa Maria del Fiore. This wasn't just any dome. It was the largest in the world at the time, a feat of engineering that left everyone from architects to astrologers scratching their heads and wondering, how did he do it? Brunelleschi's dome, completed in 1436, was a marvel. At 375 feet tall, it was like the Renaissance equivalent of launching a rocket to Mars. It wasn't just the size that was impressive, it was the method. See, Brunelleschi didn't use the traditional wooden scaffolding that was common at the time because, well, they didn't have enough trees in Tuscany to support such an endeavor. Instead, he invented a herringbone pattern for the bricks, allowing the dome to support itself as it rose. Talk about thinking outside the box, or in this case, the dome. But don't let the romantic allure of this architectural wonder fool you. Brunelleschi wasn't just about the art. He was also about the ego. The man had a competitive streak that would make even the most ambitious startup founder blush. He famously kept the details of his construction methods under wraps, worried that someone might swipe his ideas. In a world where intellectual property was more about who could yell the loudest, Brunelleschi knew his worth and protected it with a ferocity that bordered on paranoia. Meanwhile, down the cobbled streets of Rome, something equally monumental was happening. The city was undergoing what can only be described as a papal makeover. The popes were less focused on spiritual salvation and more on architectural salvation. They wanted Rome to reclaim its title as the center of the civilized world, and that meant building big, bold, and beautiful. Forget sermons. It was all about skylines. Pope Julius Roman II, known as the Warrior Pope, was one of the main architects of this urban renaissance. His vision for Rome was grandiose, to say the least. He initiated the construction of the new St. Peter's Basilica, a project that would become one of the largest churches in the world. Michelangelo, who was roped into designing the dome, probably couldn't tell if he was sculpting marble or his own sanity by the end of it. The basilica wasn't completed until 1626, long after Julius's death, a testament to both the complexity of the project and the persistence of papal ambition. And let's not overlook the economic intricacies of these grandiose projects. Building a dome the size of a small planet or a basilica that could double as an airport terminal doesn't come cheap. The financial demands were astronomical, and someone had to foot the bill. In Florence, the wool guilds and wealthy patrons like the Medicis bankrolled Brunelleschi's masterpiece. In Rome, the papacy funded their urban makeover through a combination of church tithes, what we'd now call creative fundraising, hello, indulgences, and good old-fashioned borrowing. The economic implications of these projects were enormous, impacting everything from local labor markets to international trade routes. These architectural wonders weren't just about showcasing artistic genius. They were power plays, pure and simple. A bigger dome or a more magnificent basilica signaled not just piety, but also political muscle. They were a form of soft power, a way to influence without outright aggression. If you could build something that made people stop and stare, you didn't just win the architectural battle. You won hearts, minds, and most importantly, wallets. And while we're on the topic of myths and realities, let's debunk a common misconception. The Renaissance wasn't a time when everyone suddenly became enlightened and forgot about worldly concerns. The reality was more like a juggling act, with art and architecture as the dazzling balls the wealthy kept in the air to distract from the grimy realities of everyday life. Sure, they wanted to leave a legacy, but they also wanted to secure their place in the social pecking order. In this dance of ambition and artistry, the Renaissance was as much about the politics of architecture as it was about the beauty of it. The buildings were aspirational, yes, but they were also deeply practical, serving as symbols of power and stability in a world that was anything but. The rivalry between city-states didn't stop at the borders. It extended skyward, and the only limit was how high you could build before the bricks started whispering about gravity. As we gaze back at these towering achievements, it's easy to get swept up in the romance of it all. But remember, behind every arch and every fresco was a web of political intrigue and economic necessity. The Renaissance wasn't just a period of artistic rebirth. It was a time when buildings were as much about the bottom line as they were about the divine. So, as we peer through the cracks of history, don't just admire the beauty. Dig deeper, and you'll find a story of ambition, ego, and human ingenuity that still resonates in today's world of skyscrapers and sky-high ambitions. But hold on, because this Renaissance ride is far from over. We've only just begun to scratch the surface of this architectural arms race. There's still more to uncover about the people, the politics, and the power plays that shaped this glittering era. So stay tuned, because the best stories are the ones that leave you wanting more, and the Renaissance, well, it's the gift that keeps on giving. So, we've strutted through the Renaissance's architectural catwalk, but let's switch gears and feast on something a bit more digestible. It's time to dig into what was really cooking in the Renaissance kitchens and dining halls, because oh boy, did they know how to throw a party. Think of these gatherings as the Oscars of the 15th century, where the red carpet was a banquet table groaning under the weight of culinary masterpieces and political intrigue. First, let's address the elephant, or rather the peacock, in the room. You've probably heard tales of Renaissance feasts featuring extravagant peacock pies, feathers and all. Sure, they might have served it, but don't let the plumage fool you into thinking everyone was munching on such delicacies daily. The reality, most folks were more likely to be dining on humble fare like bread, beans, and the occasional bit of pork if they were lucky. A peacock pie was less a regular menu item and more a status symbol, a culinary way of saying, look at me, I'm so fancy I eat birds that are more fashion statement than food. Now, if we're talking about the true superstar of the Renaissance dining scene, let's give a round of applause to sugar. This sweet stuff was the ultimate flex in the 1400. While today we might take a casual stroll down the candy aisle, back then, sugar was akin to gold dust. It was imported from the Middle East and Mediterranean with a price tag that could make a banker weep. We're talking upwards of $50 a pound in today's money, making it the Bitcoin of the Renaissance. Everybody wanted it, but few could afford it. For the elite, sugar wasn't just a sweetener, but a tool for sculpted art. Imagine arriving at a banquet to find an intricate sugar sculpture of a castle or an entire garden. These sugar creations were the Renaissance version of tabletop centerpieces, but instead of flowers, It was all about the artistry of confection. A status symbol you could eat. What's not to love? These banquets were more than just gluttonous gatherings. They were the ultimate political playground. A well-thrown feast could solidify alliances, woo potential allies, or even subtly one-up a rival. The food was meticulously planned to reflect the host's wealth and power, with imported spices like saffron or cinnamon sprinkled liberally, not for flavor, but for the flex. And if you think today's political dinners are calculated, imagine trying to outmaneuver your enemies while balancing a plate of roast swan and a goblet of imported wine. Speaking of wine, you might be curious about the liquid courage that fueled these Renaissance powwows. Wine was the drink of choice, flowing as freely as the gossip. Italian vineyards were as much a part of the cultural landscape as the art and architecture, with regions like Tuscany and the Veneto producing barrels of the stuff. And while today we might sip a glass to savor, back then it was often consumed in quantities that would make a frat party look like a tea gathering. After all, what better way to cement a new alliance than over a cup, or 5, of Chianti? But let's not romanticize these feasts too much. Behind the clinking goblets and extravagant dishes was a world of inequality. While the wealthy dined on exotic spices and meats, the average Joe was more concerned with putting bread on the table. Grain was the staple of the common diet, with wheat, barley, and rye forming the base of most meals. In times of poor harvests, the lower classes faced hunger, while the rich simply imported what they needed from elsewhere. The banquet table might have been an arena of political power for the elite, but for the majority, it was a distant dream. And while we're debunking myths, let's squash the idea that the Renaissance was one big, happy, enlightened culinary revolution. Sure, there were advancements in cooking techniques and presentation, but everyday life was still a struggle for many. The notion of everyone living in a culinary paradise is as much a fantasy as the idea of every artist being a solitary genius. The reality, as always, was messier, steeped in class divides and economic disparities. Yet, in this swirl of opulence and poverty, the Renaissance's culinary scene was undeniably a time of transformation. It was a period when food became more than just sustenance. It was a statement, a way to project power, influence, and creativity. The kitchen was a stage, and the chefs were the unsung artists of their time, crafting dishes that were as much about spectacle as they were about taste. As we continue our journey through this vibrant era, let's keep in mind that the Renaissance, in all its glory and grit, was a time of stark contrasts. The same society that birthed the Mona Lisa and the dome of St. Peter's also saw people grappling with the harsh realities of life. It was a world where art and ambition danced a delicate tango, and where the feast was as much about the show as it was about the sustenance. So, as we digest these culinary tales, remember that behind every sugar sculpture and peacock pie was a story of human ambition, creativity, and yes, a fair bit of culinary cunning. The Renaissance was, after all, a feast for the senses, a time when the boundaries of human potential were stretched, one sumptuous banquet at a time. And as we look forward to uncovering more of this tantalizing era, stay tuned, because the Renaissance still has many more courses to serve. Ah, the Renaissance, a time when even a simple meal could tell tales of ambition and artistry. But as we wipe the metaphorical crumbs from our mouths, let's step back and take a good, hard look at why this era, with its feast of contradictions, still holds us in thrall. Spoiler alert, it's not just because of the pretty pictures and grand buildings. First, let's address the elephant in the art gallery. The Renaissance was not some magical period where everyone suddenly discovered the joys of creativity and enlightenment. Nope, it was as much about elbowing your way to the top as any reality TV show. Sure, we romanticize it now, but you can bet your bottom florin that back then it was a cutthroat, dog-eat-dog world, except the dogs were city-states and the bones were power and prestige. Yet, despite the grit and grime of its realities, the Renaissance has left an indelible mark on our modern world, both in tangible achievements and in the myths we cling to. Let's start with the art. Today, we can't walk into a museum without tripping over a Renaissance masterpiece. Da Vinci's Mona Lisa alone pulls in millions of visitors to the Louvre each year. That's not counting the memes. But beyond the aesthetic appeal, what's fascinating is how these works continue to influence contemporary art. The Renaissance redefined perspective, literally, with techniques like linear perspective that gave depth to paintings. This wasn't just eye candy, it was a paradigm shift. Before this, art was more about telling stories flatly, like medieval PowerPoint slides. But Renaissance artists, they turned canvases into windows to another world, forever changing how we perceive visual art. And while the art gets a lot of airplay, let's not forget the scientific strides. The Renaissance was the launchpad for some of history's most revolutionary ideas. It was a time when the notion that the Earth revolved around the sun could still get you a one-way ticket to the Inquisition. Yet, thinkers like Copernicus and Galileo pressed on, laying the groundwork for modern astronomy. Fast forward to today, and we're shooting rockets to Mars. The Renaissance dared to question the heavens, and in doing so, set the stage for a future where the sky is, quite literally, not the limit. Speaking of questioning, the Renaissance also sparked a cultural shift in how we view the individual. Before this period, the collective was king, but the Renaissance ushered in the idea of humanism, a belief that human beings, not divine characters, were at the center of the universe. This was groundbreaking, a move that would eventually lead to the Enlightenment and the modern emphasis on individual rights and liberties. So, the next time you find yourself pondering your place in the universe, tip your hat to those Renaissance folks who decided humans were worth a closer look. And let's not skip over the economic impact. The Renaissance was a time when trade and commerce were as vibrant as a Michelangelo fresco. Financial innovations of this period, like double-entry bookkeeping, laid the foundation for modern economics. Imagine a world without accountants. On second thought, don't. The rise of banks, credit systems, and stock companies during the Renaissance set the stage for today's global economy. While we might groan about taxes and interest rates, the economic principles born in this era enabled the world to expand and connect in ways previously unimaginable. But here's the kicker. Despite all this progress, the Renaissance was far from a utopia. Don't let the flowing robes and marble statues fool you. This was a time of rampant inequality. While the Medici family could commission a chapel just because they felt like it, the average villager was more concerned with avoiding starvation. This dichotomy between opulence and poverty is a tale as old as time, yet it's a narrative we often overlook in our romanticized view of the Renaissance. The reality is that, much like today, wealth and opportunity were not evenly distributed. So why do we still romanticize this era? Perhaps it's the allure of a time when human potential seemed limitless, when art and science burst forth despite, or perhaps because of political chaos and social upheaval. The Renaissance was a testament to human resilience and creativity, a golden age of achievement set against a backdrop of adversity. It's a story of triumph and struggle, of beauty and brutality, and that's a narrative that resonates even now. And then there's the ever-appealing myth of the genius artist, toiling away in solitude, blessed with divine inspiration. It's a comforting image, one that speaks to our desire to see greatness as something magical rather than the result of hard work, patronage, and a fair bit of luck. But while we love our legends, it's important to remember that these solitary geniuses were deeply embedded in a network of politics, economics, and society. They were as much products of their time as they were shapers of it. In the end, the Renaissance is a mirror, reflecting both the best and worst of human endeavor. It's a reminder that beauty and brutality often exist side by side, that progress and power struggles are intertwined. We romanticize the Renaissance not because it was perfect, but because it was real. It was a time of contradictions, much like our own, a time when humanity reached for the stars even as it grappled with the mud at its feet. So, as we wrap up this journey through the Renaissance, let's carry forward the lessons it teaches us, that art and science can coexist and drive each other forward, that individuals can make a difference even amidst chaos, and that while we may dream of golden ages, it's the grit and grind that often spark the greatest transformations. As we close the book, or podcast, on this vibrant chapter of history, remember that the Renaissance, in all its grandeur and grit, continues to shape our world. It's a legacy of ambition and imagination, a testament to what humanity can achieve when it dares to dream, even in the darkest times. So here's to the Renaissance, a time when art and ambition danced a delicate waltz, leaving behind a legacy that still captivates and challenges us today. And as we look to the future, may we carry forward the spirit of innovation and resilience that this era so boldly embodied. Rosa Macaulay, a name that might sound pretty ordinary at first glance, but anyone who knows their American history knows there's nothing ordinary about her story. You see, before she became the iconic Rosa Parks we all know and admire, she was a young girl born in Tuskegee, Alabama, on February 4, 1913. And let's be real, growing up in the heart of the Jim Crow South was a bit like playing a never-ending game of dodgeball, only instead of rubber balls, you were dodging the ludicrous laws of racial segregation. Rosa's early years weren't exactly a walk in the park. Her father, James Macaulay, was a carpenter, and her mother, Leona, a teacher. They were living in a world where separate but equal was the law of the land, except the equal part was as fictional as unicorns. Schools, water fountains, buses, everything was split right down the middle by race. But here's the kicker. The white facilities were usually as luxurious as a five-star hotel compared to the rundown state of black facilities. Makes you wonder how they kept a straight face while claiming it was equal. When Rosa was 2, her parents separated, and she moved with her mother to Pine Level, Alabama, where she was raised on her grandparents' farm. And it was here, amidst the rows of cotton and corn, that Rosa first learned about resilience and self-reliance. Not exactly the set of skills you'd expect from a future civil rights leader, but hey, life's funny like that. Fast forward to her teenage years, and Rosa's navigating the social landscape with the kind of grace that would make a swan envious. But even a swan has to dip its head underwater sometimes, and for Rosa, those moments came when she attended the Alabama State Teachers College for Negroes in Montgomery. Sadly, she had to drop out to care for her sick grandmother and later her mother. So much for chasing academic dreams. In 1932, she married Raymond Parks, a barber and a staunch member of the NAACP. That's the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, for those keeping track of acronyms. Raymond was a man who understood the power of a haircut and a protest sign, and he was already knee-deep in the civil rights struggle before Rosa ever set foot on that famous bus. Now, let's talk about Rosa's job as a seamstress. It might not scream revolutionary career, but it had its own set of challenges. Think pin-pricked fingers and endless small talk. Rosa worked at the Montgomery Fair department store, stitching together clothes while also sowing the seeds of social change in her spare time. And let's face it, dealing with temperamental customers who probably thought sweatshop was a term for an exercise class wasn't exactly a picnic. Here's a fun tidbit. Rosa once said, "I had almost a life history of being rebellious against being mistreated because of my color." That rebellious streak was there long before her famous bus ride. Picture the absurdity of having to give up your seat on a bus just because someone else's skin happened to be a few shades lighter. It's like if your boss asked you to vacate your desk every time the mailman walked by. Ridiculous, right? During the 1940s and 1950, the socio-political scene was a boiling pot of injustice and inequality. The South was still clinging to its segregation laws like a shipwrecked sailor to a piece of driftwood. And while World War II had ended in 1945, promising a new era of peace and prosperity, the promise seemed to have a whites-only sign hanging over it when it came to civil rights. The plight of African Americans was stark. They were denied the right to vote, faced systemic discrimination in employment and housing, and were subjected to the terror of lynch mobs. In 1955, just months before Rosa would take her stand by sitting down, the murder of Emmett Till, a 14-year-old African-American boy, shocked the nation. His brutal death was a chilling reminder of the racial hatred that was still very much alive. By this time, Rosa was serving as the secretary of the Montgomery NAACP. Being a secretary might sound trivial, but let's not underestimate its significance. Rosa was privy to all the key discussions and decisions. She was right in the thick of the action, absorbing it all like a sponge, and ready to squeeze it out when the moment was right. Rosa's life was a mix of the ordinary and extraordinary, woven together in a tapestry of quiet defiance and unyielding courage. Her work at the NAACP involved investigating cases of racial violence and discrimination, a job not for the faint-hearted. Yet, she did it with a calm determination that would have made even the most seasoned detective tip his hat. And so, as the 1950s ticked on, Rosa Parks was living the life of an everyday woman, going to work, looking after her family, and fighting for justice in whatever way she could. Little did she know, in just a few short years, she would become a symbol of resistance, a beacon of hope in a world shrouded in the gloom of segregation, in a world where buses were rolling reminders of racial inequality and water fountains could segregate you faster than you could say, Jim Crow. Rosa Parks was quietly stitching together the fabric of change. It might have looked like a simple life, but beneath the surface, the threads of revolution were ready to unravel a system of injustice that had been sewn into the very fabric of American society. And then came December 1, 1955, a day that would forever ink Rosa Parks into the annals of history. What's often painted as a tale of a weary seamstress simply too tired to give up her bus seat is, in reality, a classic case of historical oversimplification. Sure, Rosa Parks was tired, but she was not just physically exhausted from a long day's work. She was tired of the unending cycle of racial humiliation. This wasn't some spontaneous act of defiance. It was a calculated stand against a system as creaky and absurd as a poorly scripted soap opera. Now, let's set the scene. It was a typical December day in Montgomery, Alabama, and Rosa had just finished her shift at the Montgomery Fair department store. She boarded the Cleveland Avenue bus, paid her 10-cent fare, a chunk of change back then, and took a seat in the colored section. Here's a fun fact that puts the segregation in mind-boggling. The first few rows were reserved for white passengers, no matter how empty those seats were. And then the bus began to fill. The driver, a man named James F. Blake, had a history with Rosa. He'd once kicked her off his bus for refusing to re-enter through the back door after paying her fare. Talk about a toxic relationship. On this day, Blake noticed that the white section was full, and some white passengers were left standing. He moved the sign marking the racial boundary and demanded that 4 black passengers, including Rosa, relinquish their seats. 3 complied. Rosa, however, remained seated, a simple action that sent shockwaves throughout the nation. Far from the passive act of a weary traveler, Rosa's decision was fueled by a cocktail of courage and conviction. She later recounted, "I was not tired physically. No, the only tired I was tired of giving in." This wasn't just about a seat on a bus. It was about standing up, or rather, sitting down, for dignity and equality. Rosa Parks was arrested and fined $10 plus $4 in court costs. Doesn't sound like much, but back then, that was the equivalent of nearly a week's wages for many. This wasn't just a legal penalty. It was symbolic of the financial and social costs of challenging segregation. Her arrest lit the fuse for the Montgomery bus boycott, a strategic and economic protest that aimed to desegregate the city's public transportation system. Led by a young pastor named Martin Luther King Jr. Perhaps you've heard of him. The boycott was a sophisticated operation. It wasn't just people walking instead of riding. It was a grassroots revolution, orchestrated with military precision. Carpool systems were organized, and black taxi drivers offered rides for the same 10-cent fare that the buses charged. The economic pressure was immense. Montgomery's buses were hemorrhaging cash faster than a gambling addict at a Las Vegas casino. The company lost about $3,000 per day, roughly $30,000 in today's money, all because African Americans, who made up about 75% of the bus riders, simply stopped using the service. That's what you might call hitting them where it hurts, right in the wallet. This was more than a financial hit. It was a public relations quagmire. The world was watching, and Montgomery officials were scrambling like cats on a hot tin roof. They tried everything from harassment to intimidation to break the boycott, but the community stood firm. The resolve was as unyielding as a rock, and the message was clear. The days of passive acceptance were over. The boycott stretched on for 381 days. Yes, over a year. It wasn't just a flash in the pan. It was a drawn-out battle that tested the community's endurance and resolve. Legal battles ensued, and there were countless threats against the leaders and participants. Yet, the movement trudged on with the tenacity of a marathon runner in the final stretch. Rosa Parks' arrest might have been the spark, but the boycott was the firestorm. It demonstrated the collective power of a united community and set the stage for future civil rights victories. Yet, it's important to remember that, while Rosa Parks became a symbol, she was also a real person who faced real consequences. She lost her job and endured threats to her safety. Her act of defiance was neither easy nor without sacrifice. To sum it up, the romantic image of a lone, tired seamstress defying the odds is compelling, but it's the deeper narrative of calculated courage and collective action that truly resonates. Rosa Parks didn't just sit down to rest her feet. She sat down to stand up for what was right. And in doing so, she helped ignite a movement that would forever alter the course of history. Stay tuned, because the bus boycott was only the beginning. The civil rights movement was gearing up for bigger battles, and Rosa Parks was just one of its many heroes who knew that taking a seat could be such a revolutionary act. And speaking of revolutionary acts, let's talk about how things snowballed after Rosa took her historic seat. Her arrest was supposed to be a quick, silencing blow from segregationists. But oh, how the tables turned. Instead of quelling dissent, the arrest of Rosa Parks became a public relations disaster for those clinging to the old ways. It was like trying to put out a fire with gasoline, spectacularly ineffective and guaranteed to draw a crowd. Rosa's quiet defiance resonated far beyond Montgomery. Her mugshot became a symbol of dignity against indignity, an image that sparked outrage and empathy alike. Suddenly, Rosa found herself thrust into the national spotlight, a reluctant celebrity in the fight for civil rights. She was hailed as the mother of the civil rights movement, a title that came with both honor and a heap of unintended consequences. Let's be clear, Rosa didn't wake up that December morning planning to become an icon. She was just tired of being treated like a second-class citizen, and her simple act of resistance was a beacon for those who felt the same way. Naturally, this didn't sit well with those dedicated to maintaining the status quo. Segregationists found themselves on the defensive, scrambling to justify their draconian laws to a world that was increasingly skeptical of their logic. They were like a band trying to play an outdated tune while the crowd demanded something new and revolutionary. The arrest backfired spectacularly, becoming one of the greatest miscalculations in the annals of oppressive policy. But let's not forget the other key players who came into the limelight thanks to Rosa's brave stand. Enter Martin Luther King Jr., a young and relatively unknown pastor at the time. King was just 26 years old, barely old enough to rent a car without a fee today, but he was about to become the face of a movement. His eloquence, charisma, and unwavering commitment to nonviolent protest were exactly what the movement needed to capture the nation's attention. The Montgomery bus boycott became King's proving ground, and he rose to the occasion with a fervor that was both inspiring and a bit intimidating. Imagine walking into a room and meeting someone who speaks with the force of a hurricane, yet maintains the calm of a gentle breeze. That was King, a man whose mere presence could electrify a room and galvanize a movement. This was no small feat, considering the tense and often perilous atmosphere of the time. And speaking of awkward first meetings, one can only imagine the initial encounters between these civil rights icons. Picture the scene. Rosa Parks, the unassuming seamstress whose quiet courage defied an entire system, meeting King, the charismatic orator poised to lead a nation toward justice. It's like stumbling into a superhero convention where everyone's powers are real and the stakes are life-alteringly high. Then there was E.D. Nixon, the head of the local NAACP chapter, and a man who understood the power of a well-placed strategy. Nixon was instrumental in organizing the boycott and ensuring that Rosa's arrest did not fade into obscurity. He was the kind of guy who could see 10 moves ahead on the chessboard of social change, a strategic genius in a time when every move mattered. Together, these figures and many others orchestrated a movement that was as much about unity and strategy as it was about individual acts of bravery. The boycott was meticulously planned, with carpool systems and alternative transportation methods ensuring that the community could continue to function without relying on the segregated bus system. It was a logistical marvel, akin to coordinating a city-wide dance without missing a step. The boycott also had a profound economic impact, as we mentioned earlier. The bus company hemorrhaged money, losing around $3,000 a day, or about $30,000 in today's dollars. This wasn't just a financial hit, it was a wake-up call. The message was clear. African Americans were not just passengers, They were essential to the economy and society. Their collective action proved that change was not only possible, but inevitable. As the boycott dragged on for over a year, the pressure mounted. National and international media began covering the story, turning the spotlight on the deep-seated racism and injustice in Montgomery. Segregationists were on the ropes, struggling to maintain an image of control while the world watched their every move. It was like trying to perform a magic trick when everyone knew the secret. The jig was up, and the audience was no longer buying it. And let's not forget the humor amid the tension. Imagine the bewilderment of the segregationists when they realized their iron grip was slipping, not because of violent uprisings, but because of peaceful resistance. It was like expecting a boxing match and finding yourself in a chess tournament, confusing, frustrating, and utterly out of their depth. Rosa Parks' unintended fame, meanwhile, became a double-edged sword. On one hand, she was celebrated as a hero and a symbol of courage, but on the other, she faced relentless scrutiny and pressure. Her life was dissected and analyzed, her every move watched by supporters and detractors alike. Fame, it turned out, was not all roses and accolades. It came with its own set of burdens and expectations. Yet through it all, Rosa remained steadfast. Her quiet dignity and unwavering resolve were a testament to the strength of the human spirit in the face of adversity. She became an enduring symbol of the fight for justice, proving that sometimes the most revolutionary acts are those that come from the heart, not the headline. So, as we wrap up this chapter, remember that the story doesn't end here. The Montgomery bus boycott was just the beginning of a broader movement that would reshape the nation. Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King Jr., and their allies embodied the spirit of change, setting the stage for future battles in the ongoing struggle for civil rights. Stay tuned as we continue to explore the ripples of their actions and the transformative power of courage in the face of injustice. As the civil rights movement gained momentum, the media transformed into an unexpected ally and a bit of an unruly beast. Newspapers, magazines, radio, and the relatively new medium of television latched onto Rosa Parks like she was the latest viral sensation. Though back then, viral was just something you hoped your doctor could cure. Her story became the spark that lit up living rooms across America, bringing the struggle for civil rights into stark relief for those who'd previously been content to look the other way. But here's where it gets interesting. The media did more than just report. It mythologized. Rosa Parks was often portrayed as the weary seamstress who simply refused to stand, a narrative that, while powerful, glosses over the calculated courage behind her actions. This simplified version of events was easier to digest, sure, but it also obscured the strategic planning and community support that turned an act of defiance into a movement. The narrative was like a movie trailer that leaves out the plot twists, enticing but not entirely accurate. Meanwhile, the economic repercussions of the Montgomery bus boycott were anything but mythical. Local businesses were hit harder than a piñata at a hyperactive kid's birthday party. With African Americans making up about 75% of the bus ridership, their absence was a financial gut punch. Think about it. Over 381 days, the city's purse took a thrashing, losing about $3,000 a day back then, which translates to a jaw-dropping $30,000 daily loss in today's dollars. It was the economic equivalent of a slow, relentless leak in a supposedly unsinkable ship. This wasn't just about empty bus seats, either. Businesses throughout Montgomery felt the pinch as foot traffic dwindled. The ripple effect was as real as it was painful, like dropping a bowling ball into a kiddie pool and watching the water splash over the sides. Shops that once thrived on the patronage of black customers found themselves in dire straits. The irony, many of these businesses had supported segregation only to be caught in the economic crossfire of their own making. Politically, things got as messy as a toddler's dinner plate. Segregationists, desperate to maintain the status quo, tried to spin the boycott as an attack on states' rights. They argued, with a straight face no less, that the federal government had no business meddling in local affairs. Never mind the fact that these local affairs involved denying basic human rights. It was a classic case of deflection, like a magician trying to distract you with one hand while the other hand picks your pocket. Yet, despite these attempts to reframe the narrative, the boycott forced a national conversation about civil rights and justice. People couldn't ignore what was happening in Montgomery. It was like trying to ignore a marching band in a library. Impossible and increasingly embarrassing. The media coverage brought the harsh realities of segregation into homes across America, leading many to question the morality of a system that could so blatantly disregard human dignity. But let's not sugarcoat it. The path to change was fraught with danger and resistance. The boycott leaders faced intimidation, violence, and an avalanche of legal challenges. Martin Luther King Jr.'s house was bombed, and activists were arrested on trumped-up charges. It was as though the opposition had cracked open a playbook titled How to Be the Bad Guys in a Civil Rights Movement. Yet every attempt to quash the boycott only seemed to bolster the resolve of those involved. They were as unyielding as a stubborn mule, and their determination was catching. And then there was Rosa Parks herself, who faced personal and professional fallout. She lost her job at the department store and was hounded by threats. Her quiet strength became a rallying cry for a movement that was anything but quiet. She might not have sought the spotlight, but once it found her, she used it to illuminate the broader struggle for equality. In doing so, she became both a symbol and a target, her life forever altered by that fateful decision to stay seated. The media's role in this drama can't be overstated. Their coverage elevated the civil rights movement from a regional squabble to a national crisis, forcing Americans to confront the disparities in their society. The mythologizing of Rosa Parks simplified a complex narrative, but it also made it accessible, turning her into a relatable heroine whose actions resonated with anyone who'd ever felt the sting of injustice. Yet as powerful as these stories were, they were just the beginning. The civil rights movement was gearing up for even greater challenges, and the lessons learned in Montgomery would serve as a blueprint for future actions. The media, for all its sensationalism, played a crucial role in shaping public perception and galvanizing support. It was a double-edged sword, wielded with varying degrees of accuracy and intent, but it helped carve out a path toward progress nonetheless. So, as we leave this chapter, remember that the struggle was multifaceted, involving economic sacrifices, political battles, and the relentless pursuit of justice. The story of Rosa Parks and the Montgomery bus boycott is one of resilience and resistance, a testament to the power of ordinary people standing, or in this case, sitting, together for extraordinary change. And while the media might have painted a picture in broad strokes, the reality was a tapestry of courage and conviction, woven together by those who refused to accept the world as it was, and instead imagined it as it could be. Stay tuned, because the next part of this saga promises even more twists, turns, and triumphs in the ongoing fight for civil rights. While the media reveled in crafting a mythology around Rosa Parks, the reality of her life after the Montgomery bus boycott was anything but glamorous. Imagine being celebrated as an emblem of justice while simultaneously grappling with personal upheaval. It's akin to being handed a crown made of thorns. Parks was lauded as a hero, but heroism doesn't pay the bills or protect you from the harsh glare of the spotlight. After losing her job at the department store, Rosa and her husband Raymond faced financial difficulties that would make even the most seasoned budgeter break into a cold sweat. In 1957, seeking a fresh start and some semblance of normalcy, Rosa and Raymond moved to Detroit, Michigan, the motor city that promised a new beginning but delivered a fresh set of challenges. While Detroit was a world away from Montgomery's segregation laws, it was no utopia. Racism in the North had a different flavor, less overt but just as bitter. Rosa found work as a secretary and receptionist for U.S. Representative John Conyers, a position she held for over 2 decades. Not quite as headline-grabbing as her bus protest, but it was here that she continued her advocacy, focusing on issues like housing and criminal justice reform. You know, the kind of gritty, unglamorous work that doesn't make for a Hollywood blockbuster, but is crucial in the fight for equality. Conyers, who was elected to Congress in 1964, wisely recognized Rosa's invaluable experience and commitment to civil rights. He was no fool. Having Parks on your team was like having a secret weapon in the political arena. Her presence lent credibility and strength to his legislative efforts, and she used her position to push for policies that addressed systemic inequities. Yet even as she worked in the halls of power, Rosa remained a humble figure, eschewing the limelight for meaningful action. Despite this, the rosy narrative of a single act of defiance continued to overshadow her broader efforts. Rosa Parks wasn't just a woman who refused to give up her seat. She was a lifelong activist, committed to dismantling the machinery of racism and inequality. The romanticized image of her as a demure seamstress was both a blessing and a curse, simplifying her legacy to a singular moment while ignoring the relentless work she did before and after that fateful day on the bus. The passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 were monumental victories that owed much to the groundwork laid by activists like Rosa. These pieces of legislation were like the grand finale of a fireworks show that had been building for decades, lighting up the sky with hope and possibility. Yet, as we know, laws alone don't change hearts or minds. The struggle for equality continued, requiring the same grit and determination that had propelled the civil rights movement from its inception. While the Civil Rights Act outlawed discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin, the Voting Rights Act struck at the heart of voter suppression, dismantling barriers that had kept African Americans from exercising their democratic rights. These legislative victories were as consequential as they were hard-won, opening doors that had been slammed shut for far too long. But Rosa Parks knew that signing a bill into law was just the beginning. Implementation was the true battleground, and she remained vigilant, ensuring that the promises of these acts became reality. Rosa's post-boycott life also saw her engaged in community organizing and education, speaking at events in universities across the country. She was a living testament to the power of perseverance, a quiet force who inspired countless others to challenge the status quo. Her speeches were less about grandstanding and more about grounding. She spoke from a place of lived experience, her words as impactful as a well-thrown punch in a prize-fight. Despite her continued activism, Parks faced significant challenges, including health issues and the ongoing struggle for recognition and financial stability. It wasn't until later in life that she received the accolades she so richly deserved, including the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1996 and the Congressional Gold Medal in 1999, honors that, while prestigious, were long overdue. It's like getting a pat on the back after running a marathon. Nice, but it doesn't erase the blisters. Rosa Parks passed away on October 24, 2005, at the age of 92. Her death marked the end of a remarkable life, but also served as a reminder of the work still to be done. Parks' legacy is not just about a single act of defiance, but about a lifetime of dedication to justice. She showed that the fight for equality is not a sprint, but a marathon, requiring endurance, strategy, and the courage to keep moving forward even when the finish line seems out of reach. As we reflect on Rosa Parks' legacy, it's crucial to strip away the varnish of myth and appreciate the raw, unadulterated truth of her journey. She wasn't just the mother of the civil rights movement. She was its beating heart, a tireless advocate who understood that real change comes not from a single moment of defiance, but from a lifetime of commitment. Her story is a testament to the power of ordinary people to effect extraordinary change, a reminder that sometimes sitting down can be the most powerful act of standing up. So, the next time you find yourself frustrated by the slow pace of progress or the enormity of the challenges ahead, remember Rosa Parks. Remember that one person, armed with courage and conviction, can spark a revolution. Her life was a masterclass in resilience, a vivid illustration of the impact one individual can make when they refuse to accept the world as it is, and instead dare to imagine it as it should be. And if that's not a lesson worth remembering, then I don't know what is. In the grand theatrical production of history, few figures have managed to steal the spotlight quite like Winston Churchill. But before he became the bulldog of Britain, leading his nation through the cacophony of World War II, Churchill was just a man with a penchant for cigars, an unquenchable thirst for whiskey, and a knack for blundering into, and occasionally out of, disaster. Let's start with young Winston, a lad born in 1874 at Blenheim Palace. Sure, it sounds posh, but don't let that fool you into thinking his upbringing was all sunshine and roses. His parents, Lord Randolph Churchill and Jenny Jerome, were the kind of Victorian aristocrats who thought parenting was best left to nannies and boarding schools. Little Winston was shunted off to Harrow School, where he did about as well as a fish trying to climb a tree. He excelled in English and nothing else, which is like acing the guitar, but failing every other instrument in the band. Churchill's early career was a veritable buffet of military and political opportunities. Some he devoured, others he choked on. He started as a war correspondent, finding his way to Cuba, the northwest frontier in India and Sudan. His dispatches were as colorful as his personality, with sentences as long as the Nile itself. But it was his escape from a Boer POW camp in South Africa in 1899 that turned Churchill into a household name. The man had a flair for the dramatic, that's for sure. Despite a rocky start in politics, by 1911, Churchill was First Lord of the Admiralty. It sounds fancy, and it was, but it also came with a side of catastrophe known as the Gallipoli Campaign. This was the brainchild of a man who thought he'd open a new front during World War I by attacking the Ottoman Empire through the Dardanelles. It was a bold move, reminiscent of someone trying to sneak a horse into a dog show. The campaign was a logistical train wreck, with 250,000 Allied casualties. It was a flop so colossal, it could have sunk the Titanic twice over. Yet, Churchill was nothing if not resilient. He took his lumps, learned his lessons, and kept moving forward. After Gallipoli, he found himself out of government, but like a boomerang, he was destined to return. During his time in the political wilderness, Churchill kept himself busy by painting, riding, and drowning his sorrows in alcohol, though he'd argue he was simply swimming with them. He once quipped, "I have taken more out of alcohol than alcohol has taken out of me." By the 1930s, Churchill's political career seemed about as promising as a paper umbrella in a hurricane. He was out of the cabinet, and his warnings about the rise of Nazi Germany were dismissed as the ramblings of a man clinging to relevance. But when you're right, and Churchill was very right. His foresight was as sharp as his wit, which is saying something given his fondness for a verbal jab. In 1940, with Europe on fire and Britain next in line, Churchill was appointed Prime Minister. It was like handing the microphone to the guy who'd been shouting the truth from the back of the room. He was 65 years old, an age when most people are considering retirement, but Churchill was just getting started. His speeches were a blend of inspiration and defiance, like a verbal cocktail of espresso and dynamite. He rallied a nation with lines like, "We shall fight on the beaches." Sounds rousing until you remember the beaches were not for sunbathing, but for fending off an invasion. Churchill's leadership during WWII was a masterclass in grit and determination. He was the kind of guy who'd roll up to meetings in a bathrobe, cigar in hand, and still command the room. It wasn't just his charisma that kept Britain afloat. It was his ability to learn from past blunders and his sheer force of will. He once said, "Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts." And continue he did, through bombings, blockades, and political squabbles that would make a soap opera look tame. Churchill's rise to power was anything but straightforward. He was a man who thrived on chaos, who saw opportunities in what others deemed disasters, and who understood that leadership was as much about resilience as it was about strategy. A man of paradoxes, Churchill's life was a tapestry woven from both triumph and failure, each thread adding to the complex portrait of a leader who could lose a battle, yet win the war. So, as we delve further into Churchill's role in the global maelstrom that was WWII, remember that behind the iconic speeches and steadfast leadership was a man who knew how to turn his stumbles into stepping stones. A man who, against all odds, led Britain through its darkest hour with a cigar in one hand and the future in the other. As Churchill took the helm in 1940, Britain was like a lone ship in a stormy sea, facing the Nazi blitzkrieg that had already steamrolled through Europe. Let's be clear. It wasn't like Churchill swooped in wearing a cape, ready to save the day. The situation was grim, and doubts were as thick as the London fog. His first days as Prime Minister were spent navigating a political minefield, with some of his own cabinet members questioning if he was the man for the job. Churchill's speeches during this time were the stuff of legend, and "We shall fight on the beaches" was like the punk rock anthem of its day. Delivered on June 4, 1940, it was more than just words. It was a lifeline. Picture this. Britain, freshly stung by the evacuation from Dunkirk, needed a morale boost like a fish needs water. Churchill's speech was the verbal equivalent of a caffeine shot, electrifying the nation with lines like, "We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets." It was a masterclass in rhetoric, delivered with the kind of gravitas that could make even the most cynical Brit sit up and say, "All right, maybe we've got a chance." Yet, behind the rousing words was a man who knew the stakes. Churchill understood that Britain was not just fighting for survival, but for the very idea of freedom. In private, though, he was aware that Britain's resources were stretched thinner than a miser's wallet. The country's military equipment was woefully inadequate, with only about 500 tanks ready for action, and barely enough planes to keep the RAF airborne. The economic strain was equally daunting. By 1940, Britain's gold and currency reserves were down to just £1 billion, enough to run a small country, but not enough to keep a war machine going. Churchill's leadership style was as much about sheer force of personality as it was about strategy. He had a knack for turning adversity into opportunity, but he wasn't immune to the chaos swirling around him. His war cabinet meetings were a blend of high-stakes poker and group therapy, with Churchill as both dealer and counsellor. He faced criticism from colleagues like Lord Halifax, who favoured negotiation with Hitler, an idea Churchill dismissed with all the subtlety of a hawk swatting a fly. Halifax was convinced that some sort of settlement might preserve the British Empire, but Churchill saw it as a death knell for freedom. The tension within his cabinet was palpable. It was less a cohesive team and more a collection of personalities, each with their own agenda and doubts. Churchill had to navigate these treacherous waters with the finesse of a diplomat and the tenacity of a bulldog. His ability to inspire and cajole, to lead and listen, was crucial. Yet, it wasn't just his cabinet that needed convincing. The British public needed reassurance that their sacrifices would amount to something more than a footnote in history. And then there was the matter of convincing the Americans. At this point, the United States was sitting on the sidelines, watching the chaos unfold like a spectator at a particularly brutal rugby match. Churchill knew that Britain needed more than stirring speeches. It needed allies, and fast. His correspondence with President Franklin D. Roosevelt was a delicate dance of diplomacy and desperation. Churchill laid out the grim realities with the charm of a man asking for a favor while dangling from a cliff. He needed American support, both morally and materially, to keep Britain in the fight. In the meantime, Churchill faced the relentless blitz over London. The Luftwaffe's night raids were designed to break the British spirit as much as their infrastructure. Between September 1940 and May 1941, Londoners endured 57 consecutive nights of bombing. It was enough to make anyone question their resolve, yet Churchill remained the indomitable face of defiance, even as he privately grappled with the weight of responsibility. The war was costing Britain £5 million a day, and the country was hemorrhaging money like a sieve. Churchill's ability to maintain a brave front while the world seemed to crumble around him was a testament to his character. He knew that leadership was as much about perception as it was about action. While he projected confidence, he was acutely aware of Britain's precarious position. It was this duality, public courage and private concern, that defined his early days as Prime Minister. Despite the chaos, or perhaps because of it, Churchill thrived. His leadership was a paradox, a blend of hope and realism that kept Britain fighting when surrender seemed the easier option. So as we close the curtain on this chapter of Churchill's wartime odyssey, remember that the man behind the speeches was as complex as the times he navigated. Stay tuned, because the story of Churchill's wartime leadership is only just getting started. And trust me, it's a tale as riveting as any you'll find in the annals of history. So, with Churchill firmly gripping the wheel of Britain's battered ship, we sail into one of the most crucial chapters of World War II, the Battle of Britain. Now, if you think this was just about Spitfires and pilots with stiff upper lips, think again. Sure, the image of young RAF pilots, the few, as Churchill called them, taking to the skies is as iconic as they come. But behind the scenes was a less glamorous but equally vital element, radar technology. Imagine if the British air defense system was a jazz band, radar was the bass line, keeping everything grounded and in sync. Let's set the stage. It's 1940, and the Luftwaffe, Germany's air force, is chomping at the bit to pulverize Britain into submission. Hermann Goering, the Luftwaffe's head honcho, was convinced they could balm Britain into a peace treaty. But here's where Churchill's strategic genius comes into play. While Goering was boasting about his air superiority, Britain had quietly been developing radar technology, which was about to become Germany's worst nightmare in the skies. Radar, or radio detection and ranging for the uninitiated, was the technological marvel that turned the tide in the Battle of Britain. Thanks to the efforts of scientists like Robert Watson Watt, Britain had a chain of radar stations, known as Chain Home, stretching from the Isle of Wight to Scotland. This wasn't just a bunch of tech geeks playing with radio waves. This was strategic foresight. Radar gave the RAF precious minutes to scramble fighters into the air before the German bombers even crossed the channel. Let's talk numbers. The Chain Home system could detect aircraft from as far as 120 miles away and at altitudes up to 25,000 feet. This meant that the RAF, with its limited number of planes, barely 700 fighters at the start, could efficiently deploy its resources without wasting time or fuel. This is where the myth meets reality. While plucky pilots were indeed heroic, it was radar that played the unsung hero, standing quietly behind the curtain, pulling the strings of success. And Churchill knew the importance of this technological edge. He understood that public morale was as crucial as military might, and he brilliantly balanced the two. The British public saw the dogfights and cheered the pilots, but Churchill recognized the invisible hand of radar guiding their triumphs. He famously noted, "Never was so much owed by so many to so few," but quietly. He might have whispered a thank you to the radar operators, too. Now, let's pivot to Churchill's diplomatic dance with the other world leaders. If you thought his relationships were straightforward, you're in for a plot twist. Picture a soap opera, but with nuclear weapons and global stakes. First, the love-hate dynamic with Franklin D. Roosevelt. These two were like an old married couple, full of affection, but with a penchant for bickering over the dinner table. Roosevelt liked to keep Churchill guessing. In 1941, the Lend-Lease Act was passed, allowing the U.S. to supply Britain with vital war materials on a pay-later basis. It was like handing your friend a lifeline, with a note saying, "Don't worry about it, just pay me back when you can." But Roosevelt was no pushover. He leveraged this aid to push Britain towards post-war cooperation, including the dismantling of the British Empire, a future that Churchill was less than thrilled about. Their correspondence was a masterclass in diplomatic tête-à-tête. Churchill would write with the charm of a seasoned raconteur, while Roosevelt would respond with the aloofness of a man who knew he held all the cards. Despite their differences, they bonded over their mutual enemy, and their wartime correspondence was peppered with wit. At one point, Churchill quipped, "Only thing worse than fighting with allies is fighting without them." Then there was Joseph Stalin, the prickly porcupine in this geopolitical zoo. Churchill's alliance with Stalin was about as comfortable as a porcupine in a balloon factory. The two met in person in 1942, and Churchill found Stalin as charming as a Siberian winter. Yet, necessity forced them into partnership. The Soviet Union had borne the brunt of Hitler's Eastern offensive, and Churchill realized that keeping Stalin on side was crucial, despite his distaste for the Soviet leader's methods. Their meetings were a clash of personalities and ideologies. Churchill, ever the orator, found Stalin a tough nut to crack. The Soviet leader was more interested in territorial gains than Churchill's grand speeches. At the Tehran Conference in 1943, Churchill tried to impress with his rhetoric, only for Stalin to cut him down with icy pragmatism. It was like trying to woo a bear with a sonnet, impressive but ultimately futile. But perhaps no anecdote captures the Churchill-Stalin dynamic better than their infamous drinking sessions. Churchill, ever the fan of a stiff drink, once found himself matching Stalin shot for shot with vodka. As the night wore on, Churchill realized he was in over his head. Stalin, a seasoned drinker, was barely fazed. Churchill, meanwhile, discovered that the only thing worse than a hangover was a hangover with Stalin staring you down across a conference table. Churchill's strategic decisions during World War II were not just about military maneuvers, but also about navigating the complex web of alliances and rivalries. He had to balance the demands of war with the intricacies of diplomacy, all while keeping an eye on the post-war world. His relationships with Roosevelt and Stalin were pivotal, each fraught with tension and compromise. They were allies, yes, but also rivals, each with their own vision for the future. In the grand chess game of war, Churchill was a master player, understanding that each move had consequences far beyond the immediate battlefield. As we delve deeper into his wartime strategies, remember that behind every decision was a man acutely aware of his place on the world's stage, a man who could charm, cajole, and confront in equal measure. Churchill's leadership was a tapestry of contradictions, a blend of idealism and realism that kept Britain afloat in its darkest hour. So, as we pause in this ongoing saga of Churchill's wartime exploits, remember that the story is far from over. There are more battles to fight, more alliances to forge, and more myths to unravel. Stay with me, because the tale of Churchill in World War II is a roller coaster of epic proportions, and we're only halfway through this wild ride. As we strap in for the next leg of this historical roller coaster, let's dive right into one of Churchill's most ambitious endeavors, Operation Overlord. Now, if that sounds like the title of a sci-fi epic, it's because it practically was, minus the aliens. This was the codename for the Allied invasion of Normandy in 1944, a military operation so massive it made previous campaigns look like a game of Risk. Picture this: over 156 000 troops, 11 590 aircraft, and around 7 000 naval vessels, all converging for what would become known as D-Day. But before we get swept away by the romance of storming the beaches, let's pause to consider the sheer audacity and complexity of the plan. Pulling off Operation Overlord required the kind of intricate coordination that would make a Swiss watchmaker weep with envy. This wasn't just a matter of tossing some soldiers onto French shores and hoping for the best. Oh no, this was a meticulously crafted symphony of deception, logistics, and sheer willpower. Churchill knew the stakes. The success of Overlord was critical to breaking the Nazi stranglehold on Western Europe. But here's the kicker. Churchill wasn't entirely sold on the idea at first. He was more inclined towards a Mediterranean strategy, aiming to strike the soft underbelly of Europe. Some historians argue this was partly due to Britain's dwindling manpower and resources, which were more suited to smaller, targeted operations than a full-blown invasion. Yet, the Allies needed a bold move, and with pressure from Roosevelt and Stalin, Churchill eventually came around. The operation began on June 6, 1944, D-Day. It was a day that would live in infamy, not just for its scale, but for its staggering human cost. Casualties on the first day alone were estimated at over 10,000, with nearly 414 confirmed dead among the Allied forces. But let's not sugarcoat it. D-Day was as brutal as it was necessary. The beaches of Normandy became a crucible of courage, chaos, and sacrifice. The public back in Britain had a mixed bag of emotions, pride in their troops and horror at the losses. Churchill himself was acutely aware of the cost. He famously quipped, "In war, you can only be killed once, but in politics many times." It was a reminder that behind every decision lay the weight of human lives. Now, if Operation Overlord was the hammer, then the bombing campaigns were the anvil. And this is where the Churchill myth starts to show some cracks. The strategic bombing campaign, particularly over Germany, was one of the most controversial aspects of the war. The aim was to cripple German industry and morale, but the reality was a murky mix of devastation and ethical quandary. The statistics are sobering. Between 1940 and 1945, Allied forces dropped approximately 7 million tons of bombs on Europe, with Germany receiving the lion's share. Cities like Dresden became symbols of the campaign's brutality. The firebombing of Dresden in February 1945 resulted in an estimated 25,000 civilian deaths, a figure that haunts historical debates to this day. Churchill himself grappled with the moral implications. While he supported the bombing campaign as a necessary evil, he wasn't blind to its horrors. In a memo to his chiefs of staff in March 1945, he expressed unease about the indiscriminate bombing of German cities, suggesting that the destruction of Dresden remains a serious query against the conduct of Allied bombing. Yet, the public narrative was different. Churchill was portrayed as the steadfast leader, the bulldog who wouldn't flinch in the face of tough decisions. It was a narrative that suited the times, but it also glossed over the complexities and the human toll. This is where the myth of Churchill as the unerring strategist begins to unravel. He was a man who made difficult, sometimes unpopular choices, often under the crushing weight of necessity. Historians have long debated whether the bombing campaigns were justified or excessive. Some argue that they hastened the end of the war by undermining German industrial capacity and morale. Others see them as a grim testament to the darker side of total war, where civilian lives became collateral damage in the pursuit of victory. Churchill's wartime strategies, particularly the bombing campaigns, are a reminder that history is rarely black and white. It's more like a Jackson Pollock painting, messy, chaotic, and open to interpretation. Churchill understood this ambiguity. He once remarked, "History will be kind to me, for I intend to write it." And write it he did, crafting a legacy that balanced on the knife edge between heroism and hubris. As we pull back the curtain on the legend of Churchill, it's crucial to remember the man behind the myth. He was not an infallible savior, but a leader shaped by the tumult of his times. His decisions during the war were a blend of brilliance and blunder, courage and controversy. Churchill's leadership was a study in contrasts, a testament to the complexity of human nature and the harsh realities of war. So, as we continue this journey through Churchill's wartime odyssey, keep in mind that the story is far from over. There are more layers to peel back, more myths to unravel, and more truths to uncover. Stay with me, because the narrative of Churchill in World War II is as intricate as it is captivating, and the best, or perhaps the most challenging, is yet to come. As we edge toward the post-war period, the spotlight shifts from Churchill, the wartime leader, to Churchill, the politician, facing peacetime challenges. Now, if you thought navigating a world war was tricky, try steering a nation through the aftermath. The war might have ended, but the political battleground was just heating up. Let's just say the transition from hero to has-been can be swifter than you'd expect. Despite his wartime success, Churchill's Conservative Party suffered a stunning defeat in the 1945 general election. By July 1945, the British public, weary from 6 years of conflict and yearning for social reform, decided it was time for a change. It was like the nation collectively said, "Thanks for the victory, Winston, but we're ready for something new." Enter Clement Attlee and the Labour Party, who swept to victory with a mandate for sweeping social change, including the establishment of the National Health Service and nationalisation of key industries. This was a seismic shift, with Attlee's Labour securing 393 seats to the Conservatives' 197. Churchill, the man who had steered Britain through its darkest days, suddenly found himself out of office. It was a fall from grace that would have felt like being booted off the stage after the encore. But let's not forget, Churchill had a knack for resilience. Not one to wallow in defeat, he took up the mantle of leader of the opposition, a role he embraced with the tenacity of a bulldog gnawing on a bone. His years out of power weren't just spent on the backbenches. In 1946, he delivered the famous Iron Curtain speech in Fulton, Missouri, warning of Soviet expansionism and coining a phrase that would frame the Cold War narrative. It was classic Churchill, bombastic, bold, and absolutely on point. The speech signaled a shift in global politics, with Churchill once again playing the prophet, albeit from the sidelines. Churchill's second stint as Prime Minister from 1951 to 1955 was like a reunion tour that doesn't quite live up to the original. While he did oversee Britain's acquisition of nuclear weapons, his later leadership was marked by declining health and a Britain grappling with its diminished global influence. By the time he resigned in 1955, Churchill was more the elder statesman than the dynamic leader of yore. Now, let's tackle the elephant in the room, Churchill's legacy. It's as multifaceted as a Rubik's Cube, with each twist revealing a different side. On one hand, he was voted the greatest Briton in a 2002 BBC poll, a testament to his enduring impact on British identity. Churchill's image as the indomitable bulldog, the man who wouldn't back down, is a narrative that resonates deeply with a nation that values grit and perseverance. But let's not airbrush the picture just yet. Churchill's imperialist views and policies have drawn significant criticism, particularly his role in the Bengal famine of 1943, where an estimated 3 million people died. Critics argue his policies exacerbated the crisis, with Churchill reportedly saying, "I hate Indians," They are a beastly people with a beastly religion. It's a stark reminder that even the most celebrated figures have shadows lurking behind their storied legacies. His views on race and empire are contentious, to put it mildly. Churchill was a product of his time, a staunch believer in the British Empire, at a time when the sun was setting on colonial rule. He opposed Indian independence and viewed the empire as a force for good, a stance that doesn't quite square with modern sensibilities. Yet, to dismiss Churchill outright is to overlook the complexities of his character and the context of his era. He was a leader who embodied both the best and worst of his time, a man of contradictions, as flawed as he was formidable. Churchill himself once said, "The farther backward you can look, the farther forward you are likely to see." It's a fitting reflection for a man whose legacy is as much about the future he shaped as the past he inhabited. In his twilight years, Churchill became a living symbol of a bygone age, his presence as much a reminder of history's weight as its lessons. He returned to art and writing, winning the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1953 for his historical writings, a testament to his lifelong affair with words. As we wrap up this journey through Churchill's life and legacy, it's tempting to reach for simple conclusions, but history rarely obliges. Churchill's story is one of resilience and redemption, triumph and tragedy. He was a man who, despite his flaws, embodied the spirit of an era defined by monumental struggle and change. His leadership during World War II was nothing short of iconic, but his legacy, like history itself, is complex and multifaceted. Churchill left behind a world forever changed by his actions and words. From the beaches of Normandy to the halls of Westminster, his influence echoes through time, a testament to the power of leadership in the face of adversity. As we reflect on his life, let's remember that history is not just a record of what was, but a guide to what might be. Churchill once said, "Success is stumbling from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm." It's a sentiment that captures the essence of his life, a life lived on the precipice of greatness, always with an eye to the future. In the year 1162, give or take a few, a baby named Temujin was born on the wide, open steppes of Mongolia. Now, if you think you've had a rough start in life, wait till you hear about this guy. Temujin's dad, Yesuje, was the head honcho of a small tribe, which sounds great until you realize that tribe leader in 12th century Mongolia was a bit like being the manager of a particularly unruly kindergarten. You had power, sure. You also had a lot of headaches. Not to mention, Yesuje's power was as solid as a sandcastle in a desert storm, constantly threatened by rival tribes, backstabbing allies, and the occasional poisoned kumis, a fermented mare's milk that was basically the cocktail of choice back in the day. Temujin's childhood was something straight out of a medieval survival reality show. His dad was assassinated when he was just 9, leaving his family to fend for themselves. The tribe, showing their compassionate side, promptly abandoned them. Imagine being a kid whose only inheritance was the knowledge that literally everyone could turn their back on you. But this little orphan didn't just roll over and accept his fate. No, sir. He learned the art of resilience, a skill that would serve him well in the wild world of Mongolian politics. The socio-political climate of 12th century Mongolia was a bit like a Game of Thrones episode. Endless betrayals, shifting alliances, and a whole lot of people trying to stab each other in the back. Mongolia wasn't a unified empire, but a patchwork quilt of tribes, each with its own ambitions and agendas. It was a land where your best friend today could be your mortal enemy tomorrow, and the alliances were as stable as a house of cards in a wind tunnel. Amidst this chaos, Temujin was learning the ropes, figuring out who to trust and how to wield influence. But don't picture young Temujin as a lone wolf just yet. He was a master of strategic social networking long before LinkedIn was a thing. For instance, at a tender age, he was betrothed to Bert, a marriage that was less about love and more about sealing alliances. The bond with Bert's tribe was strategic, giving Temujin a vital support base. Talk about marrying up. When Bert was kidnapped by a rival tribe, Temujin launched a rescue mission, which not only won him his wife's undying loyalty, but also started building his reputation as a formidable leader. Temujin had a knack for turning friends out of foes and allies out of adversaries. He understood the power of unity in a land defined by division. His rise to power was less about brute force and and more about brain power. It was like watching a chess grandmaster at work, moving pieces with precision, foreseeing moves that others couldn't even dream of. By forging alliances with other tribes and making strategic marriages, he gradually cobbled together a coalition strong enough to take on the world, or at least Mongolia. In a society where every man was for himself, Temujin stood out by thinking bigger. He envisioned a united Mongol nation, something as fantastical as a unicorn to his contemporaries. But he had a vision, and more importantly, he had the charisma to sell it. He was the kind of leader people wanted to follow, because he made them believe they were part of something greater than themselves. He could rally his warriors with promises of wealth and glory, while whispering sweet nothings of unity and power into the ears of tribal leaders. And so, from the rough-and-tumble childhood of abandonment and adversity, Temujin emerged as a force to reckon with, the leader of a small but growing tribe. His early life was a testament to the idea that even the most unlikely beginnings can lead to extraordinary ends. It's a tale of grit, wit, and a whole lot of determination. Little did the world know that this kid from the steppe, who once had nothing but a dream and a handful of loyal friends, would soon be known as Genghis Khan, the conqueror who would carve out the largest contiguous land empire in history. But that's a story for another time. From the embers of adversity, Temujin rose, not just as a leader, but as the asterisk leader, soon to be christened Genghis Khan, the guy who wouldn't just change the map, but redraw it entirely. And if you think he did it by simply riding over his enemies like a Mongol superhero, think again. This wasn't about brute force. It was about brain power, innovation, and a little touch of madness. Let's talk military genius, starting with tactics that were as fresh as a summer breeze on the steppes. The Mongols weren't just a horde, they were a precision instrument. Imagine a blitzkrieg long before the term existed. Genghis Khan's army was nimble, a cavalry force that moved like lightning across the landscape. Picture this, an army of 100,000 men that could move an astonishing 100 miles a day. These were horsemen who practically lived in the saddle, sleeping, eating, and even conducting meetings while on horseback. Forget about conference rooms. These guys were discussing battle plans at a canter. Now, maintaining such a force wasn't just about feeding soldiers. It was about feeding the horses, and lots of them. A Mongol warrior often had 3 to 4 horses, a personal stable to rival any modern equine enthusiast. This logistical feat involved moving what was essentially a mobile city across vast distances. It's estimated that each horse needed about 10 pounds of grass and 2 gallons of water daily. You do the math. Feeding tens of thousands of horses on the move required not just planning, but a touch of miracle working. But let's not romanticize it too much. The reality was harsh. This wasn't a Hollywood epic with noble steeds drinking from crystal-clear streams. The Mongol campaigns often traversed some of the harshest terrains known to man, from the arid Gobi Desert to the freezing Siberian plains. The army's success lay in its ruthless efficiency and pragmatism. If a horse went lame, it was left behind. If a warrior fell, there was no pause for mourning. Survival was the name of the game, and the stakes were as high as they come. Now, about those initial conquests. Genghis Khan didn't just march into battle. He danced into it with a strategy that was both devastating and elegant. Take the Battle of the Kalka River in 1223, a textbook case of Mongol cunning. The Mongols feigned retreat, a classic move that left their enemies thinking they'd won. But like the world's deadliest surprise party, the Mongols turned around and ambushed their pursuers, obliterating them with a ferocity that was shocking even by medieval standards. It was like watching a master chess player sacrifice a piece, only to checkmate his opponent 3 moves later. And let's not overlook the psychological warfare. Genghis Khan was a master of mind games long before Sun Tzu became a household name. The Mongols knew the power of reputation. They cultivated an image of invincibility that often won battles before they even began. Stories of their brutality spread like wildfire, tales of entire cities razed, populations decimated. Was it all true? Not entirely, but the legend was enough to have cities surrender at the mere whisper of their approach. Genghis Khan understood that fear could be a more potent weapon than any sword. However, let's debunk the myth of the Mongols as mere barbaric destroyers. While their methods could be brutal, they were also shrewd administrators and excellent at assimilating the best of the cultures they conquered. Genghis Khan valued knowledge and skills, welcoming scholars, artisans, and engineers into his empire. It was as if he was running a multinational corporation, headhunting talent from everywhere. And this eclectic mix of wisdom and expertise only strengthened his regime. Economically, the Mongol conquests opened up the Silk Road like never before, turning it into a superhighway of commerce. Goods, ideas, and even diseases flowed freely from east to west and back again. The Pax Mongolica, as it came to be known, was a period of relative peace across the vast empire, facilitating trade and cultural exchange. Talk about globalization with a Mongol twist. Yet the empire's expansion didn't come without its costs. The sheer size of the conquered territories posed logistical nightmares. Communication across such distances was as slow as sending a message by carrier pigeon, only if that pigeon had to fly through a blizzard. The relay stations, called yam, were established every 25 to 30 miles, a primitive postal system that was revolutionary for its time, but still no match for the vastness of the land. So, as Genghis Khan's empire grew, so did the challenges. His innovative tactics and strategic brilliance were just part of a much larger puzzle. The Mongol Empire was a testament to what could be achieved with vision, tenacity, and a touch of audacity. And while the world remembers the bloodshed, it is crucial to acknowledge the complexity and nuance of their legacy, a blend of terror and innovation that reshaped the medieval world in ways that are still felt today. As the saga of Genghis Khan and his unstoppable forces continues, the story only grows richer, the stakes higher, and the conquests more audacious. But let's pause here, with the echoes of hooves still thundering across the plains, and leave the next chapter of this epic tale for another time. Stay tuned, because the Mongol Empire's story is far from over, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. As the Mongol Empire's story continues to unravel, the scene shifts westward, a direction that would bring Genghis Khan's ambitions crashing into Central Asia with the force of 1,000 galloping horses. If you thought the Mongol conquests were like a medieval version of a rock concert tour, you're not far off. The steppe warriors were now setting their sights on the vast and diverse expanse stretching from the arid plains of Central Asia to the bustling cities of China. The stage was set for a transformation that would leave no corner of the region untouched. First up in this whirlwind journey was the Khwarezmian Empire. Think of it as the neighborhood tough guy who mistakenly thought he could take on the new kid in town. In 1218, Genghis Khan, ever the businessman, sent a caravan of 500 men to open trade negotiations with the empire. But in a classic case of don't shoot the messenger, the Khwarezmshah decided to kill the entire caravan and then had the audacity to execute the Mongol ambassadors sent to complain. Big mistake. Huge. It was like poking a sleeping bear, only this bear had an army that could move faster than your average Amazon Prime delivery. The Mongols reacted with one of their trademark lightning campaigns. Between 1219 and 1221, they swept through the Khwarezmian Empire with the kind of ferocity that would make a summer blockbuster jealous. Cities like Bukhara and Samarkand fell, with tales of Mongol brutality echoing far and wide. Samarkand, a jewel of the Silk Road, was captured in a matter of days. The city's defenders, realizing they'd bitten off more than they could chew, surrendered, only to be met with the Mongols' ruthless efficiency in handling resistance. The Mongols weren't just conquerors, they were cultural recyclers, absorbing the skilled artisans and knowledgeable scholars into their own ranks, while leaving the defiant to face the sharp edge of their swords. But let's hit pause on the bloodshed for a moment and talk strategy, because this was no mindless rampage. Genghis Khan and his generals were masters of psychological warfare. They employed tactics that were as much about instilling terror as they were about actual conquest. Their scouts would spread exaggerated tales of Mongol numbers and brutality, effectively disarming cities before the real attack even began. It was a bit like sending your opponent a horror film trailer and then showing up in full costume. And while the Mongols were busy making history's highlight reel of conquests, their expansion had unintended consequences, some of them surprisingly positive. Take the Silk Road, for instance. Under Mongol rule, this ancient trade route was revitalized, becoming a superhighway for goods, ideas, and cultures. It was a bizarre blend of chaos and order. The Mongols provided protection for traders, ensuring the flow of silk, spices, and even ideas like paper currency and gunpowder. It was a medieval globalization project with a Mongolian twist, transforming the economic landscape of Asia and beyond. However, before you start thinking the Mongols were the original globalists with hearts of gold, let's reel it back. The Pax Mongolica, this so-called period of peace, was built on a foundation of fear. Cities that surrendered peacefully were often spared, but those that resisted faced annihilation. The Mongols left a trail of destruction that took decades, sometimes centuries, for regions to recover from. The cost of conquest was not just in lives lost, but in cultural and economic disruption. It was a peace maintained by the sword, a paradox that still baffles historians today. As we move eastward into parts of China, the Mongols' conquest only grew in complexity and scale. The Jin dynasty, which ruled northern China, found itself in the Mongols' crosshairs. The siege of Jiangdu, modern-day Beijing, in 1215 was a brutal affair, reminiscent of a medieval apocalypse. The Mongols employed siege weapons, a result of their willingness to learn from conquered peoples, and managed to breach the city's formidable defenses. The result was a nightmare for the Jin, with the city looted and many of its inhabitants killed or enslaved. In the aftermath of their conquests, the Mongols showed their knack for administration. While their methods could be as subtle as a sledgehammer, they understood the importance of governance. They implemented a system that allowed local rulers to maintain some semblance of power, provided they paid tribute and pledged loyalty. It was a clever balancing act between brutal control and shrewd governance, an early form of federalism, if you will. Yet, despite their achievements, the Mongol Empire was not without its cracks. The vastness of the empire made communication a logistical nightmare. The YAM system, with relay stations every 25 to 30 miles, was revolutionary, but still slow by today's standards. The empire's sheer size was both its strength and its Achilles heel, with long supply lines and the constant threat of rebellion in distant provinces. So, as the Mongol Empire expanded into Central Asia and parts of China, it was not just a story of conquest, but one of transformation. Genghis Khan and his successors didn't just redraw the map, they rewrote the rules of engagement, trade, and governance. The impact of their rule was felt far beyond the battlefield, influencing trade, cultural exchange, and even the development of future empires. But this tale is far from over, and the Mongol Empire's legacy is as complex as it is enduring. Stay tuned, because the saga of Genghis Khan and his unstoppable forces has many more chapters to unfold. As the Mongol Empire's saga continues to unfold, we shift our gaze from the battlefield to the boardroom, so to speak. Genghis Khan, the mastermind behind the Mongol whirlwind, wasn't just about swinging swords and galloping horses. He was also the brains behind an administration that was as formidable as his military campaigns. Enter the Yasa, his legal code that was less of a dusty old tome and more of a flexible living document, like the original terms of service agreement you couldn't just scroll past. Now, let's get one thing straight. Yasa wasn't written on stone tablets handed down from the heavens. Nope, it was more of a dynamic set of rules that evolved as the empire expanded. Think of it as the Mongol version of a startup's code of conduct, constantly updated to address new challenges. The Yasa was a curious mix of strict discipline and surprising progressiveness. It was like Genghis had a law degree from the University of Tough Love. The code covered everything from military discipline to social conduct. And while it was as unyielding as a steel girder in some respects, it was also shockingly forward-thinking in others. For instance, it promoted religious tolerance, a rarity in the medieval world where burning heretics was practically a weekend pastime. Genghis Khan believed that all faiths were valuable under his rule, as long as their practitioners were paying their taxes, of course. It was an early form of multiculturalism with a Mongol twist. But before you start painting Genghis as the patron saint of diversity, let's not forget the iron fist behind that velvet glove. The Yasa was uncompromising when it came to discipline. A soldier caught deserting would face a rather permanent retirement plan, execution. And if you thought about stealing a horse, well, you'd better be ready to part with your head. These harsh penalties ensured that order was maintained in an empire that stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea. a logistical marvel that required more than just brute force to govern. Here's the kicker. Genghis Khan's administration was meritocratic. In a world where birthright was often the only key to power, Genghis threw the playbook out the window. He valued loyalty and skill over aristocratic birth, promoting people based on their abilities. It was like a medieval version of America's Got Talent, only with less singing and more strategizing. His generals weren't chosen from a lineage of nobles, but from the ranks of those who proved their mettle on the battlefield. The message was clear. Show results, and you'll climb the ranks. And climb they did. One of the most famous examples is Subutai, a blacksmith's son who rose to become one of the greatest military strategists in history. Under Genghis, talent like Subutai's was unearthed and unleashed on the world, proving that in the Mongol Empire, your background mattered less than what you could bring to the table or the battlefield. But let's be real here. The Yasa wasn't some utopian blueprint. It was a tool of control, ensuring that Genghis Khan's vision of unity didn't splinter into 1,000 tribal squabbles. It was as much about maintaining power as it was about justice. The Mongol Empire was a vast, sprawling beast, and the Yasa was the leash that kept it from running wild. It was a delicate balancing act, holding together an empire that was as diverse as it was expansive. Economically, the governance under Genghis Khan was savvy, to say the least. The Mongols understood the power of trade and the value of a good tax policy. They standardized weights and measures across the empire, making trade as smooth as a nomad's Silk Road. The Silk Road, under Mongol supervision, became a bustling artery of commerce, with caravans moving goods faster than you can say, free 2-day shipping. This economic boom didn't just fill the Mongols' coffers. It also facilitated cultural exchange on an unprecedented scale. Yet the empire's administration wasn't without its challenges. The Mongol postal system, known as the Yam, was revolutionary for its time, with relay stations every 25 miles. But let's face it, sending messages across an empire that spanned over 9 million square miles was like trying to deliver a pizza to a houseboat in a hurricane. Communication delays were inevitable, and rebellions in far-flung provinces often simmered before the central authority could intervene. Despite these challenges, what Genghis Khan accomplished was nothing short of remarkable. He transformed a collection of warring tribes into a cohesive, albeit relentless, empire. His ability to adapt, innovate, and govern was as groundbreaking as his military conquests. The Mongol Empire wasn't just about conquest. It was about creating a new world order, one that was as complex as it was ruthless. Yet, as we dig deeper, it's crucial to demystify the legend of Genghis Khan. Yes, he was a conqueror, but he was also a statesman, a reformer, and dare I say, a visionary. His legacy is a paradox, a blend of terror and tolerance, destruction and development. The Mongol Empire's story is far from over, and as we continue this journey into its vast corridors of power, there's more to uncover. Stay tuned, because the next chapter promises even more intrigue, innovation, and perhaps a few surprises. Yet, as we dig deeper, it's crucial to demystify the legend of Genghis Khan. Yes, he was a conqueror, but he was also a statesman, a reformer, and dare I say, a visionary. His legacy is a paradox, a blend of terror and tolerance, destruction and development. The Mongol Empire's story is far from over, and as we continue this journey into its vast corridors of power, there's more to uncover. Stay tuned, because the next chapter promises even more intrigue, innovation, and perhaps a few surprises. And here we are, folks, at the grand finale of Genghis Khan's epic saga, a story that stretches far beyond the steppes of Mongolia, leaving footprints on the vast canvas of history. At its zenith, the Mongol Empire sprawled over a jaw-dropping 9 million square miles, connecting lands and peoples from the shimmering coasts of Eastern Asia to the heart of Europe. To put that in perspective, it was like playing a game of Risk where one player somehow managed to hold onto Asia, Europe, and a good chunk of the Middle East too. Impressive, right? But with great power comes great complexity. Now, let's not kid ourselves. This was no utopia. The Mongol Empire, though a marvel of military prowess and administrative ingenuity, was also a patchwork quilt sewn together with threads of fear and ambition. It was a realm where the postal system could whisk messages across continents faster than a medieval gossip chain, but also a place where rebellion simmered just beneath the surface like a pot about to boil over. Genghis Khan, the man behind the empire, was a figure of contradiction. On one hand, he was the terrifying warlord whose very name sent shivers down the spines of rulers from Baghdad to Beijing. On the other, he was the innovative leader whose policies of meritocracy and religious tolerance were centuries ahead of their time. Imagine a CEO with the ruthlessness of a Wall Street titan and the vision of a tech startup guru. That's Genghis for you. He was a master of realpolitik, understanding that to govern such a colossal empire, you needed more than just brute force. You needed a system, a way to keep the gears of this massive machine running smoothly. Enter the YAM system, Genghis's answer to snail mail. With relay stations every 25 miles, the empire could communicate across its vast expanses with surprising efficiency. It wasn't exactly FedEx, but it was revolutionary for the 13th century. Yet, even a sophisticated postal network couldn't solve everything. The sheer size of the empire meant that by the time news of a rebellion in one corner reached the capital, it often felt like hearing about a party you missed last weekend. And then there was the economy, humming along like a well-tuned instrument thanks to the revitalized Silk Road. Under Mongol rule, trade flourished like never before, with goods, ideas, and even diseases flowing freely between East and West. The Mongols, in their own way, were the original globalizers, ensuring that the world was interconnected long before the internet made it cool. But of course, globalization came with its own set of challenges. The Black Death, anyone. A little reminder that not all trade is beneficial. But perhaps the most fascinating chapter in the Genghis Khan story is what happened after his death in 1227. As with many great empires, the Mongols faced the classic dilemma: how to hold it all together without the glue that was Genghis himself. It's like trying to keep a band together after the lead singer quits. Sure, you've got the hits, but can you still fill stadiums? The answer, unfortunately, was a resounding not quite. The empire, once a testament to unification, began to fragment like a jigsaw puzzle missing several pieces. Genghis's descendants, each more ambitious than the next, carved the empire into khanates, each ruled by a different branch of the family. It was a classic case of too many cooks in the kitchen, each with their own recipe for success. The result, a period of infighting that looked like a medieval reality show, keeping up with the Khans, if you will. Despite the political fragmentation, the legacy of Genghis Khan endured in unexpected ways. His conquests, for all their brutality, had reshaped the world map, laying the groundwork for future empires and modern nation-states. The cultural and economic exchanges fostered by the Mongol Empire continued to influence societies long after the empire itself had faded. It's as if Genghis had planted seeds in the soil of history, and the fruits of his labor were still being harvested centuries later. And speaking of legacy, let's address the elephant in the room, or should I say, the genetic footprint in the family tree. It's often claimed that Genghis Khan's DNA can be found in about 16 million men today, a testament to his prolific progeny. Whether you find this fact amusing or slightly alarming, it's a reminder of the indelible mark he left on the world, one that's as biological as it is historical. It's like winning the genetic lottery, only to find out your prize is a link to one of history's most formidable figures. So, what do we make of Genghis Khan, this titan of history whose shadow looms large even today? Was he a visionary leader or a ruthless conqueror? The answer, frustratingly enough, is both. Genghis Khan was a master of duality, a man who could raise cities and yet foster trade, who could terrify and yet inspire. His story is a reminder that history is rarely black and white, but a tapestry of shades and textures. In the end, Genghis Khan's true legacy may lie in the way he reshaped the world, connecting distant lands and peoples in a way that was unprecedented for his time. He was a man who saw beyond the immediate horizon, whose ambitions stretched as far as the earth itself. And while his methods were often as harsh as the Mongolian winters, the impact of his reign was as enduring as the empire he built. As we wrap up our historical journey, let's leave behind the myth and embrace the complexity of Genghis Khan's legacy. He was a leader who defied the odds, a symbol of both the best and worst of human ambition. And as we look back on his life, perhaps the most remarkable thing of all is that centuries later, we're still talking about him. That, my friends, is a legacy worth pondering. In the dim, flickering light of a longhouse, you're standing on the cusp of a world that's as mysterious as it is magnetic. The Norse society you inhabit is a tapestry of rough seas, stern guards, and intriguingly powerful women with a knack for knowing the unknowable. Enter the Völvers, those enigmatic Viking seers who wielded staffs as authoritative as any king's scepter. Let's not sugarcoat it. These women were the closest thing to a heartline to the divine you could dial up in the 10th century, and boy did people call. Now you might think a seer, like a medieval psychic heartline. Close, but not quite. A Völver was more akin to a Norse mashup of a political strategist, spiritual leader, and yes, a bit of a fortune teller. Their role wasn't just about predicting whether you'd have good fishing weather. Oh no, these women were dialed into the cosmic scale, advising on everything from harvest times to the best days to launch a raid. Think of them as the Google Calendar of the Viking Age, but with more fur and fewer pop-up ads. To understand how they operated, let's check out their toolkit. Picture this, an iron-studded staff, possibly more versatile than a Swiss Army knife, symbolizing their role as both a conduit to the gods and a sign of their formidable status. This was no mere walking stick. It was a badge of office, a symbol of power, and occasionally, when diplomacy failed, a weapon. And speaking of power, these staffs were often about as long as a grown man is tall, because subtlety was not exactly a Viking strong suit. But let's talk business, because a Völver's services didn't come cheap. Forget your modern-day hourly rates. These consultations could cost you the equivalent of a small herd of sheep or a couple of barrels of mead. A steep price when livestock were your livelihood and mead your sanity. Precious goods like finely woven cloth or even silver were often on the table. In a society where wealth was measured in livestock and loot, the seer's fee was a testament to their perceived value, and a stark reminder that with foresight came fortune, yours for a price. Now, before you start imagining these seers as serene mystics whispering in darkened corners, let's bust a myth or two. The reality was far grittier. The Völvers didn't operate in a vacuum, swaying gently to the music of the spheres. They were deeply embedded in the social and political fabric of their time, often consulted by chieftains and kings. This wasn't just about peering into the future. It was about shaping it. In a world where tribal allegiances could shift faster than the North Atlantic weather, having a Völver in your corner was like having a secret weapon, albeit one who preferred runes to rifles. Yet, even as we demystify them, it's easy to see why the aura of romance and mystery persists. The idea of a woman standing at the crossroads of fate and fortune is undeniably captivating. But let's remember, this wasn't a glamorous gig. The Völvers faced societal costs too. They were revered and feared, respected yet isolated. Their power came with its own set of chains. In a world where the line between the natural and supernatural blurred like the horizon at sea, they walked a path few dared to tread. Influence of these women on Viking society was profound. They were more than just women with staffs. They were voices of authority in a male-dominated world, wielding influence in a society that revered strength and valor. The Völvers were a testament to the fact that power doesn't always wear a helmet or carry a sword. Sometimes it wears a cloak and carries a staff, whispering truths that echo through the ages. You see, the Völvers weren't just curious footnotes in the Viking saga. They were central characters in their own right, navigating a world as treacherous as the seas their people sailed. And as you stand here, feeling the weight of history in the air, you're reminded that even in the harshest of times, there were those who dared to see beyond the horizon. As you lean into the shadowy realm of Viking mysticism, you're not just stepping into a longhouse. You're entering a theater where the Völvers orchestrated the drama of fate itself. These women didn't just predict the future. They practically breathed it into being, weaving their visions through the complicated web of Seither, a form of magic that was as much a science as it was sorcery. Now, before you conjure up images of Hogwarts with horned helmets, let's set the record straight. Seither wasn't a simple matter of waving a wand and shouting in Old Norse. It involved complex rituals that were as socially significant as they were spiritually profound. The Völvers, often adorned in elaborate cloaks and amulets, would enter trances so deep you'd think they had a direct line to Odin himself. And maybe they did, or at least that's what everyone wanted to believe. Picture the scene. A smoky longhouse filled with expectant faces, the air thick with anticipation and the aroma of burning herbs. The Völver sits at the center, her eyes closed. chanting in a language that feels both ancient and unsettlingly close. If you're imagining this as a closed-door, members-only event, think again. These ceremonies were public spectacles, often drawing crowds that rivaled the numbers you'd see at a thing, the Viking form of a town hall meeting. Forget Netflix. This was the binge-worthy entertainment of the 10th century. Let's talk logistics. The Seers ceremony wasn't just mystical mumbo-jumbo. It was a full-blown production, requiring resources and manpower that spoke to its importance. Enter the helping spirits, or as they're known in more practical terms, the assistants and apprentices who supported the vulva during these elaborate rites. They played crucial roles, from preparing the sacred space to ensuring the vulva's physical and spiritual safety, a necessity in a world where spiritual journeys could turn as treacherous as a stormy sea. But why go through all this trouble? The stakes were high, my friend. These rituals could influence decisions with life-or-death consequences, from when to plant crops to whom to declare war against. A miscalculation wasn't just a personal setback. It could spell disaster for an entire community. The economic and social implications were enormous. In a society where the margins between feast and famine were razor-thin, a successful Seer could mean the difference between prosperity and peril. Where there's power, there's politics, and the vulvas were no exception. Their influence extended far beyond the mystic realm, seeping into the political machinations of the time. Close your eyes for a moment and see the chieftains whispering in dimly lit corners, weighing the vulva's words like gold. Her predictions could tip the scales in political alliances, shifting the balance of power faster than you can say Ragnarok. But here's the rub. With great power came significant risk. The vulvas walked a precarious line, balancing their esteemed status with the constant threat of social backlash. In a world where the supernatural was both revered and feared, these women were often viewed with suspicion. It wasn't unheard of for a vulva to become a scapegoat when things went south, her once valued insight suddenly dismissed as witchcraft. The political maneuvering could be as deadly as a Viking raid, with the stakes just as high. As we delve deeper into these ceremonies, it's crucial to peel back the layers of myth that have wrapped themselves around the vulvas like so much enchanted mist. The sagas, as enthralling as they are, paint a picture that's often more romantic than real. These stories of seers and sacrifices, while tantalizing, gloss over the grit and grime of the everyday reality that these women faced. It's a tale as old as time. The line between legend and life is as thin as a fine Viking blade. Speaking of sacrifices, let's not tiptoe around it. Yes, some rituals involved offerings, and not just the metaphorical kind. We're talking tangible sacrifices, from livestock to goods, given to curry favor with the gods or to secure a favorable outcome. This wasn't just an act of piety. It was a transaction, a cosmic barter system where the currency was whatever you couldn't afford to lose. In this world, the economic stakes were as real as a Viking's battle scars. A community could invest a significant portion of its resources into a single ceremony, betting everything on the vulva's vision. It was a gamble, sure, but one that many deemed necessary. After all, when the elements and the gods themselves seem to conspire against you, wouldn't you hedge your bets any way you could? As the final embers of the ritual fire flicker and fade, it's clear that the vulvas were more than mere mystics. They were pivotal figures in a society where fate was as unpredictable as the northern lights. Their ceremonies, steeped in mystery and practicality, remind us that in the Viking world, the supernatural was just another part of the natural order. And as we leave the longhouse, the weight of history heavy on our shoulders, we're left with a lingering question. What price would you pay for a glimpse into the future? In the Viking Age, the answer was clear, whatever it took. And so, as the smoke of another Seer ceremony dissipates, leaving only the faint aroma of burnt herbs and the murmur of a crowd hungry for prophecy, let's hit pause. Were these Viking seers, these vulvas, really the omniscient figures the sagas would have us believe? Or is this just another case of history wearing its rose-tinted glasses? Dive into the primary sources, those dusty, ancient texts that are both gold mines and minefields of historical knowledge, and you'll find a less mystical, more political reality. The Icelandic sagas, for example, often paint vulvas as larger-than-life, wielding power that could sway kings and topple empires. But let's get real. These accounts were penned centuries after the fact, by scribes who might have enjoyed a good yarn as much as the next medieval bard. Truth is probably nestled somewhere between epic tale and everyday toil. If you were to ask Snorri Sturluson, the medieval Icelandic historian who wrote the prose Edda, about these seers, he'd probably tell you a tale that's more Game of Thrones than National Geographic. But peel back the layers of saga-style hyperbole, and the Völva's real influence seems more pragmatic. They were advisors, sure, but let's not mistake them for the puppet masters pulling all the strings. Their power was significant, yet bounded, more a chess player than a chess master in the grand game of Viking politics. Now, before we go tossing around our modern cynicism like a Norseman hurling a spear, it's important to see why the myths endure. Everyone loves the idea of a wise woman whispering secrets of the universe, her words carrying the weight of destiny. But in reality, Viking society was no fairy tale. It was a gritty, often brutal world where power was as transient as the northern lights, and the Völvas had to navigate these treacherous waters with all the cunning of a seasoned raider. Consider the societal hierarchies of the time. The Viking world was a complex web of allegiances and rivalries, where your status could hinge on everything from your wealth in cattle to your prowess in battle. Within this framework, the Völvas carved out a unique niche. They were respected, yes, but also feared, and sometimes resented. In a society that valued strength and martial skill, the Völva's power was an anomaly, a soft but steely counterpoint to the clang of swords. Take the story of Thorbjorg, a Völva whose tale is recounted in the saga of Eric the Red. Invited to a feast during a harsh winter, she was asked to perform a seidr to predict the coming season's fate. The saga describes her with great reverence, dressed in a blue cloak and adorned with jewels. Yet, beneath the veneer of respect, one can sense the underlying tension. Her consultation was sought not out of blind faith, but desperate necessity. A community on the brink of starvation, willing to grasp at any glimmer of hope, however shrouded in mystery. But let's not forget the price of wielding such influence. The political landscape of the Viking Age was as volatile as a mid-Atlantic storm, and the Völvas were often caught in the crosswinds. They had to be adept at reading not just runes, but also the room, understanding which chieftain's favor was worth courting and whose ire was best avoided. A wrong prediction or poorly chosen alliance could see their fortunes change faster than you can say, Lindisfarne. And here's a twist. While these seers are often romanticized as solitary figures, the reality was that their power depended heavily on their networks. They were part of a broader community of women who held various forms of influence, from the thralls who managed households to the queens who counseled kings. The Völvas might have been at the fringes of respectability, but they were hardly isolated. In fact, their strength came from their ability to straddle both the mundane and the mystical, to be both insider and outsider. And what of the dark side of this mysticism, the suspicion that lurked like a shadow? In a world where the supernatural was both a comfort and a threat, the line between revered prophetess and reviled, which was perilously thin. The very skills that made a Völva valuable could also make her dangerous in the eyes of those who feared what they could not control. It's a story as old as time. Power, especially when wielded by women, often looks like witchcraft to those on the outside looking in. As we wind through the intricate dance of superstition and politics, it's clear that the Völva's real legacy is not one of omniscient oracles, but of shrewd navigators of a world that demanded both strength and subtlety. Their stories remind us that history is rarely as simple as it seems, and the legends we inherit are as much about our desires as they are about their deeds. So, next time you hear tales of Viking seers with stars in their eyes and the fate of nations in their hands, remember this. The truth is often less about the magical and more about the mundane, less about foresight and more about the fine art of foresightful living. The Völvas were not just mythic figures, they were human, and their stories, though wrapped in the mists of time, are anchored in the gritty reality of survival and strategy. With that, let's leave the Longhouse once more, not with a sense of closure, but with more questions than answers. Because in the end, perhaps the true magic of the Völvas lies not in what they knew, but in how they made us wonder what might be known. And as we gear up for the next chapter of this saga, remember, in history, as in life, it's often the questions, not the answers, that hold the greatest power. As we continue our journey through the fog of Viking mysticism, let's sharpen our focus on the Völva's toolkit, their physical and symbolic arsenal, if you will. These weren't just props for dramatic effect. Each item was a statement, a symbol, and sometimes a survival tool. Picture this. You're a Verver, and your staff isn't just for show. It's your badge of office, a conduit to the divine, and a subtle nudge to anyone doubting your authority. Measuring up to 6 feet, these staffs were often made from wood, but reinforced with iron, proving that even in the spiritual realm, a bit of metal goes a long way. The staffs were not just about size and strength. They were intricately carved with runes and symbols, each marking telling a story or invoking a particular power. Imagine the hours spent etching these details, each stroke a testament to a Verver's skills and knowledge. In a world where literacy was scarce, these staffs were a 10th century PowerPoint presentation, conveying complex spiritual and political messages with no need for slides. Now, let's talk attire. Ververs didn't just roll out of bed and throw on whatever was lying around. Their garments were carefully chosen, often woven from fine wool dyed in deep blues and reds, colors that screamed status and wealth. These weren't your everyday tunics. We're talking about outfits that could rival any red carpet. The blue cloak mentioned in the saga of Eric the Red was more than just a fashion statement. Blue dye, made from the woad plant, was expensive and labor-intensive to produce, making it a luxury few could afford. To wear blue was to flaunt your importance, your connection to the divine, and perhaps a touch of vanity. But the Verver's sartorial splendor didn't stop at cloaks. They were adorned with jewelry, often crafted from silver or bronze, materials that spoke of trade networks stretching across Europe. A silver pendant wasn't just for sparkle. It was a piece of the economic puzzle, a reminder of the Norsemen's far-reaching voyages and the goods they brought back. Every ring and brooch was a piece of portable wealth, a safeguard against uncertain times, and a testament to the wearer's status. As for the ceremonial belts and amulets, they weren't just accessories. These items were believed to hold protective powers, warding off evil and attracting benevolent spirits. Amulets often featured Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, a symbol of protection and power, or the Valkna, an emblem associated with Odin and the afterlife. These weren't just trinkets. They were the original wearable tech, adding layers of meaning and influence to the Verver's presence. Let's not forget the economic angle. These items were valuable commodities in a society where barter was the norm. A Verver's staff, cloak, and jewelry could be worth a small fortune, equivalent to dozens of sheep or barrels of mead. The economic implication was clear. A Verver wasn't just a mystical figure. She was a walking investment portfolio. Her possessions were not only tools of her trade, but also her insurance policy, her way of securing influence and respect in a volatile world. So, how did these items transition from practical tools to cultural symbols? The answer lies in the stories that survived them. As tales of the Ververs were passed down through the generations, their physical attributes became embedded in the cultural memory. The sagas, with their flair for the dramatic, turned staffs into scepters, cloaks into capes of power, and amulets into magical artifacts. The reality of these items, rooted in practicality and necessity, was recast in the glow of legend, transforming them into icons of Norse mythology. But why do these legends persist, and why are we so captivated by them? It's the allure of a world where the line between the natural and the supernatural was as thin as a whisper. The Ververs, with their tools and trappings, represent a bridge between our mundane reality and the realm of possibilities just beyond our grasp. Their legacy lives on, not just in the stories we tell, but in the very way we interpret the past, blending fact with fiction in our quest to understand the world. Of course, to maintain this mystique, the Ververs had to be as adept at managing their image as any modern influencer. They understood the power of perception, using their tools as props in a carefully orchestrated performance of authority and mystery. The staff, the cloak, the amulet, each was a piece of the puzzle, a way to captivate and command the attention of those who sought their wisdom. In a world where reputation was everything, the Ververs were the masters of branding, long before the term was coined. Yet, let's not ignore the skepticism, the whispering doubts that followed them like shadows. For every believer awed by a Verver's regalia, there was a cynic who saw only smoke and mirrors. It's easy to romanticize the past, to see these women as wise sages rather than shrewd operators navigating a world as treacherous as any Viking voyage. But the reality was that their power was as precarious as it was profound, dependent on their ability to maintain the balance between reverence and fear. And here's the kicker. As much as we might want to see the Vulvas as relics of a bygone era, their influence is still felt today. Symbols like Thor's hammer have transcended their original context, finding new life in everything from jewelry to pop culture. The idea of a wise woman wielding power through knowledge and mystery continues to resonate, a testament to the enduring allure of the Vulvas and the world they inhabited. As we stand at the threshold of understanding, it's clear that the Vulvas' tools were more than just objects. They were extensions of their identity, woven into the fabric of their lives and the legends that followed. They remind us that in the dance between history and myth, the truth is often found not in the details, but in the stories we choose to tell. And as we prepare to delve deeper into the saga of the Vulvas, we're left with a tantalizing thought. What other secrets do these symbols hold, waiting to be uncovered in the shadows of time? So, as we find ourselves at the threshold of Viking mysticism, let's take a closer look at the legacy these Vulvas left behind. Their tools and talents may be relics of the past, but their influence lingers like the echo of a battle cry in the fjords. The Seers, with their runic staffs and ritualistic flair, didn't just shuffle off into the annals of history. They left an indelible mark on the cultural consciousness of Scandinavia and beyond. Fast forward a millennium, and the Vulvas are still strutting their stuff on screens and pages the world over. Thanks to the likes of Vikings and the Last Kingdom, these Seers have been reimagined as everything from wise sages to shadowy sorceresses. TV shows and novels love a good mystery, and who better to provide that than women who could supposedly chat with guards over tea and biscuits? But let's be real here. Hollywood has a knack for glossing over the gritty details in favor of drama and a dash of eyeliner. But why this enduring obsession? Well, the Vulvas perfectly embody that timeless allure of the powerful and mysterious woman, a trope that's been selling tickets since the Greeks were penning tragedies. In a world where women were often sidelined, the Vulvas stand out as figures of authority and intrigue. They were the original disruptors, making waves in a culture that valued brawn over brains. Their stories serve as a reminder that influence can come from the most unexpected quarters, and that sometimes a staff is mightier than the sword. Underneath the Hollywood glam, though, lies a more sobering truth. The Vulvas, with their blend of mysticism and politics, highlight the precarious balance of power in Viking society. Their influence was as much about survival as it was about foresight. They were navigating a world fraught with danger, both from the natural elements and the human ones. Imagine trying to predict the future when your life could be upended by a sudden storm or a rival's ambition. That's a high-stakes game of chess, my friend. Take a moment to consider how this legacy has seeped into modern Scandinavian culture. The symbols and stories of the Vulvas have been woven into the fabric of national identity. Thor's hammer, once a simple amulet, now graces everything from jewelry to pop culture, emblematic of a rich heritage of resilience and adventure. The line between the mystical and the mundane has blurred, and the Vulvas, with their enigmatic charm, stand at that intersection, a testament to a culture that values both the known and the unknown. And let's not forget the economic realities that shaped their world. Viking society was no utopia. It was a precarious balance of trade, agriculture, and raiding. With resources often spread thin, the Vulvas' predictions could be the difference between feast and famine. Their consultations weren't just about spiritual guidance. They were strategic meetings, as crucial as any modern boardroom negotiation. In a world where livestock were your stocks and barns, a Vulva's blessing was a calculated investment in your future. But here's the kicker. While the Vulva's mystique has been romanticized, the reality was far from glamorous. Sure, they wielded influence, but they also lived on the edge of societal norms, always one step away from being branded a witch when things went south. Their power was as much a curse as a blessing, a precarious tightrope walk between reverence and revilement. It's a tale as old as time. Power, especially when wielded by women, tends to make folks uncomfortable. So why do we keep coming back to these stories? Perhaps it's because they remind us of the complex dance between myth and reality. The Vulvas, in all their enigmatic glory, represent a bridge between the past and the present, the tangible and the mythical. They challenge us to look beyond the romantic veneer and see the gritty truth beneath. A world where power was fought for in the shadows, as much as on the battlefield. As we wrap up this saga of seers and sacrifices, one thing is clear. The Vulvas are more than historical footnotes. They are a vivid reminder of a time when the supernatural was just another layer of reality, a force to be reckoned with as tangible as the seas that bore the Norsemen across the world. The legacy of the Vulvas lives on, not just in the stories we tell, but in the questions we ask about the nature of power, perception, and the often blurry line between legend and life. And so, as you drift off into the world of dreams, ponder this. In the grand tapestry of history, the threads of myth and reality are woven tightly together. The Vulvas remind us that the stories we inherit are as much about who we are as about who we wish to be. Their legacy is a testament to the enduring power of mystery and the allure of the unknown, a reminder that sometimes the greatest stories are those that leave us wondering what might be hidden just beyond the horizon. In 70 AD, Rome was the kind of place that made Game of Thrones look like a garden party. The city was a bustling metropolis, bursting at the seams with a population that was equal parts gladiator-loving citizens and scheming politicians. Enter Emperor Vespasian, a guy who knew how to read a room, or in this case, an empire. Fresh off the chaos that was the year of the 4 emperors, a real-life, high-stakes version of musical chairs, but with more daggers. Vespasian needed to cement his reputation as the man who could bring stability back to Rome. And what better way to do that than with a little bread and circuses? Vespasian had a vision, one that involved a colossal amphitheater that would become the ultimate symbol of Roman might and ingenuity. This wasn't just any amphitheater. This was going to be the biggest, baddest entertainment venue the world had ever seen, designed to seat 50,000 spectators. To put that in perspective, that's about the same capacity as Madison Square Garden, but with fewer hot dog stands and a lot more bloodshed. Now, let's talk about the reasons behind this massive undertaking. First, there was the matter of public morale. Rome was still reeling from the civil wars, and nothing says, let's move on, like a massive public works project. The Roman populace loved their games, and Vespasian knew that a shiny new arena where they could watch gladiators duke it out would do wonders for their spirits. Plus, it offered a handy distraction from the empire's ongoing problems, like rampant corruption and a pesky grain shortage. Then there was Vespasian's own PR strategy. He was a savvy operator who understood the power of optics. Building the Colosseum was not just about entertaining the masses, it was about leaving a legacy. This was a vanity project with a side of public service. It was like building a monument to yourself, but with the added bonus of people actually using it. And let's not forget the economic angle. The construction of the Colosseum created thousands of jobs, from architects and engineers to laborers and stonecutters. It was a boost to the economy, a way to keep people employed and, by extension, loyal. But wait, there's more. The sheer audacity of constructing such a massive structure in ancient times is mind-boggling. We're talking about an era when the most advanced machinery was a well-trained donkey. Yet, the Romans managed to build a 620-foot-long, 513-foot-wide, 159-foot-high monument with precision and skill that would make modern architects weep. The fact that they could even conceive of such a project, let alone execute it, is testament to their engineering prowess. Of course, the construction of the Colosseum wasn't all sunshine and gladiator games. It took approximately a decade to complete, with construction beginning in 70 AD and wrapping up in 80 AD under the reign of Vespasian's son, Titus. The labor force was largely made up of slaves, including many Jewish prisoners taken during the siege of Jerusalem. This little detail tends to get glossed over in the romanticized versions of history, but it's an important reminder of the human cost behind such grandiose projects. Let's also take a moment to appreciate the staggering statistics associated with the Colosseum. When it was finally inaugurated, Titus threw 100 days of games to celebrate, because why not go big when you're already home? These games were the Super Bowl of the ancient world, featuring everything from gladiatorial combat to mock naval battles. Yes, you heard that right. They flooded the arena to stage full-scale naval battles. Talk about over-the-top entertainment. In the end, the Colosseum was more than just a venue. It was a statement. It declared Rome's dominance, not just in military might, but in cultural influence. It was a marvel of engineering, a testament to human ambition and ingenuity, and a stark reminder of the costs and complexities involved in creating something of such magnitude. It was Rome's way of saying, "We are here, we are powerful, and we will be remembered." As we delve deeper into the story of the Colosseum, let's keep in mind the dual nature of this iconic structure, a symbol of imperial grandeur and a testament to the darker aspects of human history. Stay tuned for more tales from the heart of ancient Rome, where fact is often stranger and bloodier than fiction. But enough about the grandeur and glory. Let's talk about the real MVPs of this architectural wonder, the labor force. Picture this: thousands of workers, from skilled engineers to enslaved captives, transforming Vespasian's vision into a stone and sand reality. These folks weren't just laying bricks. They were orchestrating a symphony of logistics, raw materials, and sheer determination. And trust me, it wasn't all gladiators and roses. First up, the engineers. These were the brainiacs of the ancient world, the guys who made sure the Colosseum didn't end up as the world's largest pile of rubble. Armed with little more than chisels, chalk, and a whole lot of ambition, they pulled off feats that make modern-day civil engineers look like amateurs. Take the Hypogeum, for example, a complex network of tunnels and cages beneath the arena floor. It was basically the backstage area for gladiators and wild animals, complete with trapdoors and elevators powered by sheer manpower. Think of it as the ancient version of a high-tech stage at Coachella, only with more lions and less EDM. Now, let's talk about the unsung heroes, the laborers. It took an army of around 60, 000 to 100, 000 workers to complete the Colosseum, and many of them were enslaved people, including Jewish prisoners captured during the siege of Jerusalem. These individuals toiled in brutal conditions, often working from sunrise to sunset. Imagine hauling massive blocks of travertine stone, a mind-boggling 100,000 cubic meters worth, from quarries miles away. This wasn't exactly a cushy 9-to-5 gig with a dental plan. Speaking of travertine, sourcing this stone was no small feat. The Romans had to transport these hefty blocks, a single one weighing as much as 5 tons, across 20 miles from the quarries in Tivoli to the construction site in Rome. They did this using an intricate system of wooden sledges and rollers pulled by oxen. Forget Uber Eats. This was Uber Heaves. It's a testament to Roman engineering prowess, but also to the sheer sweat and sacrifice of the workers who made it happen. And let's not gloss over the conditions these laborers faced. Rome might have been the epicenter of civilization, but it wasn't exactly OSHA compliant. The work was backbreaking, the hours long, and the risks high. Injuries were common, and there was no workers' compensation if you found yourself on the wrong end of a falling stone block. Yet, despite these harsh realities, the allure of Roman engineering still captivates us today. There's a certain romanticism in imagining the Colosseum rising from the plains of ancient Rome, a testament to human ingenuity and ambition. But it's crucial to remember the human cost behind the stone facade. The Colosseum's design also speaks volumes about Roman priorities. It was built with an eye for functionality and spectacle, equipped with 80 entrances to efficiently funnel in and out the 50,000 spectators looking for their daily dose of blood and glory. The Romans were nothing if not efficient. They even had a ticketing system. Yes, those ancient Romans practically invented box office seating. Each entrance had a number, and tickets were marked accordingly, ensuring that the plebeians didn't accidentally rub elbows with the patricians in their prime seats. Talk about class warfare, Roman style. But let's not forget the economic angle either. While the Colosseum was a symbol of imperial power, it was also an economic engine. The construction provided thousands of jobs, from quarrymen and stonecutters to artists and sculptors tasked with decorating the interiors with intricate frescoes and statues. It was a massive public works project that kept the Roman economy ticking, even if it was built on the backs of those who had no choice in the matter. Yet despite the grandeur, the Colosseum's construction is a stark reminder of the darker side of Roman society. It's easy to get swept up in the myth of Roman ingenuity and forget that behind every stone laid was a story of human toil and struggle. The romantic image of Rome as a beacon of civilization often overlooks the brutal realities its people endured. And while we can marvel at the engineering feats, we must also question the societal structures that allowed such exploitation to occur. In the end, the Colosseum stands as a complex symbol, impressive, awe-inspiring, and yet sobering. It's a reminder that history is never black and white. As we continue our journey into the heart of ancient Rome, let's keep both the romance and the reality in mind. There's much more to uncover, from the games that entertained a city to the legacy that has endured for millennia. Stay tuned, because this story is far from over. So, the Colosseum, that grand edifice of Roman ambition, finally threw open its mighty gates in 80 AD, under the auspices of Emperor Titus. The inaugural games were the kind of spectacle that made modern events like the Super Bowl look like a backyard barbecue. Imagine an extravaganza that lasted 100 days, featuring a dizzying array of events designed to leave the citizens of Rome both awestruck and slightly queasy. Kicking things off was a parade of wild animals that would make Noah's Ark look like a petting zoo. We're talking about elephants, tigers, leopards, and even the occasional rhinoceros, all shipped in from the far reaches of the empire. These beasts weren't just for show. They were there to participate in the venations, or wild beast hunts. It was a brutal affair, with animals battling each other or unlucky humans in a fight to the death. Sure, it sounds gruesome, but for the Romans, it was pure, unadulterated entertainment. Then there were the gladiators, the true rock stars of ancient Rome. These warriors, often slaves or prisoners of war, fought with a variety of weapons and styles, each with its own flair and strategy. Picture this: the Murmillo with a fish-shaped helmet squaring off against the Retiarius, armed with a net and trident. It was a choreographed dance of death, complete with cheering crowds, betting, and the tantalizing scent of impending doom. Now, while these games might seem like a simple distraction for the masses, they were also a potent political tool. Titus knew that keeping the populace entertained was a surefire way to maintain stability. It was the ultimate PR move: show the people a good time, and they'll momentarily forget about the empire's woes. Bread and circuses, right. But let's cut through some of the myths that have attached themselves to this era like barnacles on a ship. First up, the infamous thumbs-up gesture. Contrary to popular belief, a thumbs-up didn't mean spare the gladiator, nor was the thumbs-down a death sentence. In reality, the gestures were more nuanced, with the thumb being extended or hidden to indicate mercy or death. The details are murky, but one thing's for sure: Hollywood got it wrong. Speaking of misconceptions, let's tackle the myth of the Colosseum being flooded for naval battles. While it's true that some smaller arenas did host mock sea battles, the logistics of flooding the Colosseum were a bit more complicated. The hypogeum, that complex network of tunnels beneath the arena, would have made it nearly impossible to create a watertight basin. So, while the idea of ships battling it out in the heart of Rome is thrilling, it's more likely that these events were staged elsewhere, leaving the Colosseum to focus on its specialties, gladiators and wild beasts. Now, onto the economic and social impacts of these epic spectacles. Hosting such grand games was no small feat. The costs were staggering, with vast sums spent on importing exotic animals, arming gladiators, and ensuring the smooth operation of each event. It's estimated that the inaugural games alone could have cost millions of sesterces, an astronomical figure that underscores the lengths to which Titus was willing to go to keep the public happy. For the average Roman, these games were a welcome distraction from the everyday grind. They were an opportunity to rub shoulders, figuratively of course, with both the elite and the hoi polloi. The seating arrangement was a microcosm of Roman society, with the emperor and his entourage in the best seats, wealthy citizens in the middle tiers, and the common folk up in the nosebleed sections. It was a reminder of Rome's rigid class system, but also a rare chance for everyone to share in the same spectacle. And let's not overlook the economic ripple effects. The games created jobs, from the animal handlers and gladiator trainers to the vendors selling food and trinkets. The influx of visitors to Rome meant bustling markets and inns filled to capacity. It was a boon for businesses, injecting much-needed cash into the local economy. Yet, amid the grandeur and excitement, there was an undeniable darkness. The bloodshed, the exploitation of both humans and animals, and the sheer scale of violence all raise uncomfortable questions about what it means to entertain. It's easy to romanticize the Colosseum as a symbol of Roman engineering and cultural dominance. but we must also confront the brutal realities that fueled its legacy. In the end, the Colosseum stands as a testament to Rome's glory and excess, a reminder of the empire's ability to captivate and horrify in equal measure. As we continue to unravel its story, we'll see how these spectacles left an indelible mark on history, a mark that echoes through time, challenging us to ponder the complex interplay of power, entertainment, and morality. Stay with us as we delve deeper into the heart of ancient Rome, where each stone tells a story, and each story reveals the triumphs and tragedies of a civilization that has shaped our world. As the dust of Rome's gladiatorial heyday settled, the Colosseum found itself at a crossroads, much like a retired rock star wondering what to do without sold-out tours. From the peak of its fame, as the epicenter of Roman entertainment, the structure faced a future as unpredictable as a gladiator's fate in the arena. The grand amphitheater, once echoing with the roars of 50,000 spectators, began a slow transformation that would see it evolve into a patchwork of medieval innovation. And let's be honest, a touch of chaos. Picture the Colosseum in its final days of glory, a venue that was more than just bricks and mortar. It was the beating heart of Roman society. But as the centuries rolled on, Rome's grip on its empire loosened, and with it, the financial and political support for extravagant games waned. By the 5th century AD, the last recorded gladiatorial combat took place, marking the end of an era. The Colosseum's purpose was no longer clear-cut, and like any grand old structure faced with obsolescence, it had to adapt or die. Enter the Middle Ages, where the Colosseum became a veritable Swiss Army knife of functionality. Forget gladiators. This was the era when the structure was repurposed for everything from housing to workshops to fortifications. It was as if the Colosseum had joined the gig economy, taking on multiple roles to stay relevant. By the 12th century, the once mighty amphitheater had even been converted into a fortress by the Frangipani family, a local Roman clan whose ambitions were as sprawling as the structure itself. This was no small feat. Imagine turning Madison Square Garden into Fort Knox, minus the gold reserves. But let's not gloss over the gritty realities of this transformation. The Colosseum, like a celebrity past their prime, faced its share of indignities. Earthquakes in 847 and 1231 AD left it battered and bruised, with large sections crumbling like a poorly baked cake. Those romanticized scenes of the Colosseum standing proud and tall, more like a majestic ruin, with nature and time conspiring to create the picturesque decay we see today. Now, onto the myth of the Colosseum's so-called abandonment. Many believe it was left to rot like leftovers in the back of the Roman pantry, but the truth is more nuanced. The Colosseum was far from forgotten. It was a resource to be exploited. Stone from the structure was quarried extensively, recycled for new buildings across Rome, a true testament to Roman resourcefulness, or a medieval recycling program, if you will. This process wasn't exactly gentle. It was more like a series of architectural amputations, with vast chunks of travertine carted away to grace other Roman edifices. But the Colosseum's story doesn't end with a mere pillaging of its stones. By the Renaissance, the amphitheater took on a new role as a monument of Christian martyrdom. The Church, ever savvy in its PR strategies, linked the structure to the blood of early Christians, allegedly thrown to the lions. While this narrative adds a somber, heroic gloss to the Colosseum's history, there's scant evidence to support it. Most historians agree that the bulk of the entertainment was decidedly non-Christian in nature, but myths have a way of sticking around, much like gum under a school desk. Fast forward to the 18th century, and the Colosseum was finally recognized as a site worth preserving. Pope Benedict XIV, in a move that was part reverence, part foresight, declared it a sacred site dedicated to the Passion of Christ. This act halted further quarrying and began the slow journey toward conservation. The Colosseum, once a venue of blood and spectacle, now stood as an emblem of endurance, a testament to survival against the odds. Yet, despite these changes, the Colosseum was never fully abandoned. It continued to serve the city in various roles, from a place of pilgrimage to an open-air venue for ceremonies and events. And like any aging icon, it became a symbol to be revered, a canvas for new narratives and meanings. It's no surprise that the structure's allure persists today, drawing over 7 million visitors annually who come to marvel at its grandeur and contemplate its complex history. In unpacking the Colosseum's evolution, we can't ignore the economic and social forces at play. The fall of Rome, the rise of feudal Europe, and the shifting sands of power all left their mark on this once mighty arena. The Colosseum's journey from a bustling entertainment hub to a decaying fortress to a cherished relic encapsulates the story of a city in transition, a civilization in flux. As we continue to peel back the layers of history, the Colosseum stands as a mirror reflecting the triumphs and follies of human endeavor. Its stones whisper tales of ambition and decline, of reinvention and resilience. Join us next time as we delve deeper into the legacy of this iconic ruin, exploring how its story continues to captivate and challenge us, much like the empire that built it. The saga of the Colosseum is far from over, and there's plenty more to uncover in the annals of ancient Rome. The Colosseum saga isn't just about stones and gladiators. It's a living testament to human nature, a grand old mirror reflecting our eternal dance with power, spectacle, and survival. Fast forward to the present, and you'll find this ancient marvel still standing proudly, a stone-clad testament to Rome's past and a magnet for modern imaginations. It's like the ultimate TARDIS, transporting us back to a time when emperors ruled with both charm and a penchant for public spectacles. In the modern era, the Colosseum has become a symbol of architectural prowess, casting a long shadow over the world of design. Its influence is as widespread as a Roman legion on the march. Look around, and you'll spot echoes of its grandeur in stadiums and amphitheaters from Paris to Pasadena. Grand arches and tiered seating have inspired everything from the Hollywood Bowl to Wembley Stadium. If imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, then the Colosseum is blushing under all that Roman concrete. But let's not just talk architecture. The Colosseum's real claim to modern fame lies in its starring role in popular culture. It's the George Clooney of historical landmarks, charismatic and seemingly ageless. From cinematic blockbusters to video games, this ancient arena has been the backdrop for countless tales of heroism and tragedy. Gladiator, Ridley Scott's cinematic love letter to Roman spectacle, catapulted the Colosseum back into the limelight, reminding audiences worldwide of the blood, sweat, and cheers that once filled its corridors. And let's not forget its cameo in the animated classic Up, where it symbolized the adventure and mystery waiting at the heart of Rome. In short, if the Colosseum had an agent, it would have a Rolodex brimming with Hollywood's finest. For tourists, the Colosseum is a bucket list destination, drawing over 7 million visitors annually who shuffle through its ancient arches in awe. It's as if every traveler who ever dreamed of Rome feels the magnetic pull of this stone giant. But as with any celebrity hotspot, this popularity comes with a catch. Preservationists face a Herculean task, balancing the need to maintain the Colosseum's structural integrity with the demands of modern tourism. Each step a visitor takes is a delicate dance between history and the present, and every selfie snapped comes with the silent whisper of centuries past. The Italian government, recognizing the Colosseum's cultural and economic importance, has invested millions in preservation efforts to ensure it doesn't crumble like a poorly made lasagna. Recent restorations have been as meticulous as a Roman engineer's blueprint, with a price tag of over euros 25 million. The project involved cleaning the stone to reveal its original hues and reinforcing the structure to withstand both time and tourists. It's the kind of makeover that would make even the most seasoned reality TV host nod in approval. Yet, these efforts to preserve the Colosseum are not without ethical dilemmas. The surge in tourism brings economic benefits, sure, but it also raises questions about the commodification of history. Are we preserving the Colosseum to honor its past, or are we simply packaging it as a consumable experience for the masses? It's a conundrum that would make even the most savvy Roman politician pause. After all, history isn't just a series of Instagram-worthy moments. It's a tapestry woven from the lives, struggles, and triumphs of those who came before us. And there's the rub. How do we balance the allure of history with the harsh realities of preservation? The Colosseum stands as a cautionary tale of both the power and fragility of human achievement. It's a monument to engineering genius and to the darker aspects of human nature. Our fascination with spectacle and our capacity for exploitation. As we wander through its arches and gaze upon its weathered stones, we're reminded that history is as much about the stories we choose to tell as it is about the truths we uncover. In the end, the Colosseum's legacy is as complex as Rome itself. It's a tale of empires rising and falling, of human ambition reaching for the stars, and of the eternal struggle to preserve our past while embracing our future. As visitors from every corner of the globe continue to be captivated by its grandeur, the Colosseum remains a testament to the enduring power of history to inspire, challenge, and remind us of the stories that shaped our world. So, as you stand before this grand relic of ancient ambition and modern marvel, consider the layers of history that echo through its stones. From the roar of the gladiators to the whispers of tourists, the Colosseum is a living archive of human experience. Its legacy isn't just in its towering arches or its storied past. It's in the way it continues to captivate our imaginations, urging us to ponder the complexities of power, entertainment, and preservation. The Colosseum endures, not just as a monument to Rome's might, but as a symbol of our shared human journey. A journey that, much like the Colosseum itself, is both timeless and ever-evolving.